שחרחורתי גאוני צחייתי ומילת שמש קיץ דלי שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמור את ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת כל יורדי אם פעם יקראוני שוב אליך שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמור את ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת בין לאחרונה אם עוד פעם יקרה שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמור את ליבי כולו שחרחורת גאוני צחייתי ומילת שמש קיץ דלי שחורי שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמור את ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת יקראוני כל יורדי אם עוד פעם יקראוני שוב אליך שחרחורת יפית כל כך בעינייך אשמור את ליבי כולו שלך שחרחורת בין לאחרונה
edge, running on the water, coming to the 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 edge, running on the water.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי, עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ, אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך, הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל, השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה וירח בלילה, השם ישמורך מכל רע, ישמור את נפשך, השם ישמור צאתך ובואך מעתה ועד עולם. שיר המעלות. אשא עיניי אל ההרים, מאין יבוא עזרי. עזרי מעם השם, עושה שמיים וארץ. אל ייתן למות רגליך, אל ינום שומרך. הנה לא ינום ולא ישן שומר ישראל. השם שומרך, השם צילך, על יד ימינך. יומם השמש לא יככה.
Shalom, everybody. Shalom, and welcome to the World Alliance of Qara'im Passover class. It's going to be a Passover Q&A. So if you have any questions, then please bring them along. If not, we'll have plenty of questions and answers to go over. And we'll discuss a lot about practical halakha. In other words, what you're required to do for Passover and what you're not required to do for Passover. And by the way, spoiler alert, you're not really required to do that much for Passover. We'll get into that. What you're allowed to eat and what you're not allowed to eat. We'll talk about the underlying meaning of the holiday. So it's usually presented as a holiday which speaks about going from slavery to freedom, and I would say it's actually a lot deeper than that. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about when does Passover fall. We'll talk about the difference between Passover and Hag HaMazoth. What is the difference between those words? What's the difference between the word Pesach, Passover, and the word Hag HaMazoth? And we'll talk about a whole bunch of other things as well. So welcome to the study. I hope you have lots of questions and I hope you have lots of comments. And with that being said, we're going to dig right in. I'm not going to do my usual monologue. I will say a couple of things. So today is Passover here in Israel, as they call it. They'll call it Chag Pesach. We'll see that is the incorrect name for the holiday, but that's what it's called in Israel, the Passover holiday, or Chag Pesach. And last night, Wednesday night, everyone did the Passover Seder here. I actually went to a rabbinical Passover Seder because, I don't know, nostalgia. I grew up as a rabbinical Jew, not an Orthodox, but a conservative rabbinical Jew in the suburbs of New York. And so there's a lot of nostalgia there. So I went to a Passover Seder with some good friends here, and it was very nice. Although it did last a heck of a long time. And then today, during the day, I went to Passover meal with other friends here in the city that I live in, here in the Golan Heights. And also, it was very nice. But that being said, Passover does not start today, not according to the biblical calendar. According to the rabbinical calendar, it does. But according to the biblical calendar, it will start Friday night. Okay, so why don't we start with that? I think that's a good place to start. Let me bring that up. If you give me 1 second here, I'm just going to grab some water. So give me 1 second, I'll be right back. Okay, I is back. So let's start with that. Let me bring up the relevant information. Just give me 1 second here to bring it up. I'm going to bring up 2 images. Just take 1 second. So in the meantime, maybe if people want to type in some of their questions what are the questions that you have about? I'm going to be calling it colloquially Passover because that's what it's called, both in English and in modern Hebrew. So in modern Hebrew, it's called Pesach or Hag Pesach. In English, it's called Passover. So if I say the word Passover, that's just because I'm speaking colloquially, but really, we're talking about. That is correct. So why did they have their Passover Seder yesterday? It's not the 14th day of the month, as far as I can tell. What's the view of the 70 elders in Numbers 11? Well, that's off the Passover topic. If we have time at the end, I'll get to that. And I know exactly where that question is leading. You must be a fan of a certain rabbi. At any rate, let's stick with Passover for now. So why did they have their Passover Seder yesterday? That is a very important question. Let me put up on the screen. Just give me 1 second here. So that goes off. Share screen, window, boom. There we go. Okay. So what you should see on the screen now is the holiday dates for the first 3 biblical months. And so we could start at the top. So if we look at, let me bring up another screen here. When was Rosh Chodesh Nisan 2026? So we can see that Rosh Chodesh Nisan, and I'll explain what this means for those who don't know. So Rosh Chodesh Nisan 5786 begins at sundown. Let me make this a bit bigger. Begins at sundown on Wednesday, March 18th, 2026. Okay, that's what we need to know. Wednesday, March 18th, 2026, at sundown, which was last night. I'm sorry, which was not last night, which was 2 weeks ago from last night. Last night was Wednesday night. Okay, so Passover, and we'll look at this in the text in just a second, starts on the 15th of the first biblical month. That's explicit in Leviticus chapter 23. So the difference is what the rabbis, what the rabbinites consider the 15th of the month, and what we Karaites, or those who follow the biblical calendar, consider the 15th of the month. And it all goes back to the Chodesh, what is the first of the month. And that's really where the discrepancy lies. So the rabbis, the rabbinites, they go by a fixed calendar, generally attributed to Hillel II, who instituted it in the year 354 CE. And this is said to be, again, I don't know if this is historical fact or a bit of folklore mixed in, but it's said to be the last law, not law, the last what's the word I'm looking for? The last takana, whatever, the last law that was laid down by the Sanhedrin before it was finally disbanded by the Romans. At any rate, so they go by a fixed calendar, which we won't go into all the details right now, but is heavily based on the late Babylonian calendar. Okay, and so the rabbinites, the rabbis say, according to this fixed calendar, they declared, or they declared the first day of Nisan, which is the first month of the year. Nisan is the Babylonian name of the month. The rabbinical calendar, or what's often just called the Hebrew calendar, we ever hear it called the Luach Ivrit, and then it's just the Hebrew calendar or the rabbinical calendar. All of the month names are Babylonian month names, which the Israelites brought back from their exile in Babylonia, starting in 586 BCE and ending approximately 70 years later. At any rate, so they declare the first day of the first month to be Wednesday, March 18th, 2026 in the evening. But if you would have gone out in the land of Israel, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, and looked up into the sky just after the sunset, which is when the new moon will always appear, it always must appear just after sunset, within an hour or two after sunset, if it's visible at all, you would not have seen the new moon. You would not have been able to see the new moon. The same goes for the following day, which was Thursday, March 19th. You would not have been able to see the new moon. So we actually went out, as we do each month, and searched for the new moon. And as you can see here, the new moon, hope you can see where I'm leading the cursor. The new moon of the first month was spotted in Israel on the evening of Friday, 20th of March, 2026. So the new moon was not visible in the sky until 2 days later than the rabbis declared. The rabbis, according to the fixed rabbinical calendar, declared it to be the Chodesh, declared it to be the new moon day. Okay. Bottom line is they were 2 days early. The visible new moon only appeared in the sky 2 days later. And so therefore, that throws off, for this month, that throws off everything by 2 days. So Passover, by the rabbis, occurs 2 days earlier than it does according to the biblical calendar. And that explains the discrepancy. Okay, so if you see here, let me just check in and make sure everything is working well over here. So if you see over here, this first green line, okay, so the name of the holiday, or the Torah name of the holiday is Hag HaMazoth. The rabbinical name is Hag Passover, the festival of Passover. So the Karaite date begins at Sunday on Friday, the 3rd of April, and ends at darkness after sunset. Did I say Sunday? I hope I said sunset. Begins at sunset on Friday, 3rd of April, and ends at darkness after sunset on Saturday, 4th of April. That's the first day of Hag HaMazoth. But for the rabbis, over here, rabbinical date column begins at sunset on Wednesday, the 1st of April, and ends at darkness after sunset on Thursday, the 2nd of April. And then it continues for a second day if you're outside of Israel. All of the holidays except for Yom Kippurim, all of the holidays, the holidays according to the rabbis, except for Yom Kippurim, are 2-day holidays, not 1-day holidays. And that also has absolutely no basis whatsoever in the Torah. And we won't even get into why it was instituted by the rabbis. The basic bottom line is that because we Karaites use a calendar of observation, we go out and we search for the new moon each month. We go out in the springtime, we search for the Aviv barley each year, and we'll get into that in a little while. Because of that, the days of the Chodesh, the days of the new moon day, can differ by up to 2 days from what the fixed calendar of the rabbis would declare. And that's exactly what happened in this case. I would say about 50% of the time, the new moon day, or the new moon as predicted by the calculated calendar of the rabbis, overlaps with what we see in the sky 50% of the time, and 50% of the time it does not. And of the 50% of the time it does not, I would say that probably around 30 to 35% of the time it's 1 day off, and it'll always be later for reasons I won't get into right now. If you go out when the rabbinical calendar predicts that it'll be new moon, you will not see it. 50% of the time you will look in the sky, you will not be able to see a new moon. It doesn't matter how clear you are, it doesn't matter, you could be on the highest mountain in the world, but if you're in Israel or east of Israel, you will not be able to see the new moon that night, about 50% of the time. And about 30% of that, so about 30% of the total 100% of the time, it'll be 1 day later that the new moon will actually be visible in the evening sky. And I would say about 20%, maybe even a little bit less, maybe 10% of the time, it will be 2 days later. Okay, so 50% of the time, it will overlap with the rabbinical calendar. 30% of the time, 35% of the time, I'll say, it'll be 1 day later that the visible new moon will actually appear in the sky. And about 15% of the time, 10 to 15% of the time, it'll be 2 days later. So here we have one of those 10% or 15% examples. The new moon was not visible in the sky until 2 days after the prediction by the rabbinical calendar. So why is the rabbinical calendar so off? Well, that's a complicated story, and I'm not going to get into an entire class about the calendar right now. I am planning to do a master class on the rabbinical versus the biblical calendar. I'll give details about that when we're ready to do it, and that will be a very, very detailed. It'll be a multi-part series delving into the differences between the biblical calendar and the rabbinical calendar. But hold on a second, my cat wants to come in, and I can't resist. He's too cute. Give me 1 second. Shoham, get over here, baby. Come here. Give me 1 second. Joshua. Stay, you gotta behave, little boy. Come here, you. Come here. Come here. You can behave. Stay right there, little boy. Okay, sorry about that. So I will post a link. This is from the newspaper that I've published really since the late 1990s, but we were in print in Jerusalem from 1997 till around 2000. Then we went onto the internet, and over the years, I've sometimes given it more attention and sometimes given it less attention. It's something that I wanted to start giving more attention, but let me post the link, and there you can get more details about why the rabbinical calendar is off. Just 1 second. So this is yourjerusalem.org if you want to check out the newspaper. And let's just find it here. And there it is. Jewish calendar slowly drifting off track. The bottom line is that any calendar that relies on calculation rather than observation is going to, by its very nature, drift. It will have no choice but to drift. It might be a very slow drift, but it will be a drift. Let me just post this so you can go check out that article if you want to get more details. So for instance, there until 1584, if I remember the year correctly, the Western world, the Christian world went by, which was the Western world, went by something called the Julian calendar, which was instituted by Julius Caesar back in the day. And because it predicted, or because it calculated a solar year of 365 and a quarter days, it actually slowly drifted off. So over the period of approximately, I believe, the initial switch over from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar was in the year 1584, if I remember correctly. So in that time, from I can't remember the exact year that Julius Caesar instituted it, but let's say around the year 0 or so, from then until 1584 CE, the calendar that actually drifted off by about 10 days, and so 10 days had to be added. So it went from, again, I don't remember the exact days, but when the switchover was from when the initial countries did the switchover from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, it was something like October 4th of the Julian calendar. When the switchover occurred, the next day was not October 5th, it was October 11th. 10 days were added, or 10 intermediate days were added. And that was because of what's called calendrical drift. Once again, any calendar that is based on calculations rather than observation is going to be subject to calendrical drift. In fact, even the Gregorian calendar, which makes a correction to the Julian calendar, is more accurate, specifically because leap years that are divisible by 100 but not divisible by 4 or years that would have been leap if they were divisible in the Julian calendar, if they were divisible by 100 and by 4. If they're not divisible by 4, then they're not leap years. To make a long story short, years like 1700, 1800, and 1900 were not leap years, but the year 2000 was leap year. Anyway, it made a correction. So the Gregorian calendar is more accurate in terms of its prediction of the solar year, but still it's subject to calendrical drift. Okay, and it's the same with the calendar of the rabbis, with the what's colloquially called the Hebrew calendar. Because it's based on a calculation, it's based on it's based on 2 cycles. I don't want to get in all the details right now, but very, very briefly, it's based on something called the molad, which is a prediction of the average synodic period of the moon. In other words, the time from one full moon, let's say, to the next full moon, on average, and then is also based on something called the Metonic cycle, which is a prediction of essentially it allows one to predict the solar year. So it's the basis of why there are 7 intercalated or leap years within a 19-year period, and it tries to synchronize between the lunar cycle and the solar cycle, because both the biblical and the rabbinical calendar are luni-solar calendars. They try to account for the lunar cycle as well as the yearly solar cycle. Anyway, I'm drifting off topic. I don't want to drift that far off topic right now. As I said, we'll do a masterclass on this at some point for anyone who wants to join. But the basic bottom line is that the calendar of the rabbis, when it says Rosh Chodesh, when the rabbinical calendar says Rosh Chodesh, half the time, approximately, you look out in the sky that night and you will not see the moon in the sky. You will not be able to see the moon in the sky, no matter how clear the sky is, no matter what high mountain you're on, you will not be able to see the moon in the sky. So that's about 50% of the time and of that 50%, then it will either be the actual visible new moon will either be 1 day later or 2 days later. In this case, the visible moon was 2 days later. The rabbis predicted a new moon, or predicted their new moon, or shall I say declared their new moon to be on Wednesday, March 18th at night, but actually it was not visible until Friday, March 20th. And that accounts for the discrepancy between when rabbinical Passover starts, which was last night, and when biblical/Karaite Passover starts, which is tomorrow night, which is Friday night. So everything is thrown off. Well, I shouldn't say everything. The Hag HaMazoth is thrown off by 2 days. We start as biblical as Karaites. We start 2 days later than the rabbinical Jews. Okay, hope that makes sense. Any questions specifically about that? And let me put up the other screenshot here. So there's a calendar. Okay, if you go to the World Alliance of Qara'im page, if you go to the website, World Alliance of Qara'im.org, then you can see these two images there. Okay, so that kind of sums it up. Okay, any questions about that topic? To make a long story short, so Paul says all those complicated calculations the rabbis make, and all someone needed to do is go outside and look up, correct? Now, of course, the rabbis will say that they had their reasons for doing so because they knew that at that point that the nation was already in exile, and they wanted to coordinate against a wide swath of Jewish communities, which at that time had spread out quite far. Even if that's the case, it doesn't apply to us now. We now have the internet. Now, the largest Jewish community in the world is Israel. There are 7.5, approximately, or 8 million Jews in Israel. So the majority, I shouldn't say that, the plurality of Jews in the world are now in Israel, and we have the internet. So even if, let's even give the rabbis the benefit of the doubt and say that they had to institute a calculated calendar in order to coordinate across a vast diaspora communities of Jews. That certainly doesn't apply anymore. The rabbis are waiting around for their Sanhedrin to undo this, but we don't need to wait around for the Sanhedrin. We could just institute it right now. And of course, the rabbis will accuse us of going against the majority, will accuse us of being renegades and radicals. But the fact of the matter is the Karaites have been going by the calendar of observation for at least 1,000 years. And that was long before the internet was around, and we've been able to work with it. So there's no reason to stop now. Okay, hope that makes sense. Let me get rid of that comment. Okay. All right. So that's the holiday dates. So what are the holiday dates? What are the Karaite holiday dates? We start tomorrow night. We're actually here in where I live in the Golan Heights in Israel. We're having a Karaite Seder tomorrow night. And then the holiday will end a week later on Friday at sunset. Okay, so it starts Friday at sunset tomorrow and ends the following Friday at sunset. Really at total darkness, or maximal darkness, but we won't get into that right now. Okay, so it's 2 days later than the rabbinical Jews are celebrating Passover this year. Okay, okie dokie. So let's see what else we want to talk about. So maybe I should give a little bit of a background as to, I'm sure many who are familiar with Karaism, familiar with the biblical calendar, already know. So the new moon is declared based on actual observation of the new moon. What if you go out and it's cloudy? Let's say it's cloudy 5 days in a row, right around when the new moon is expected to be visible. Well, what do you do in that case? There are different approaches, but the approach that most Karaites use is if it's not visible, if the new moon is not visible 29 days after the previous new moon, then on the 30th day after the previous new moon, it will automatically be declared a new moon. And that's the reason for that is no two visible new moons can be more than 30 evenings apart. Technically, in very, very rare cases, they can be 31 days apart, but it's so rare that it's negligible. So that's what we do. We go out 29 days later. If the moon is visible that night, 29 evenings after the previous new moon was declared, then we'll declare that as the first day of the new month. If not, then we'll automatically declare the following day, the 30th evening. I should say, let me be more accurate, instead of the evening, we'll declare that 30th evening to be the new moon by default, because we know that if there were no cloud cover, it must be visible. Okay, for the reason, once again, that no two visible new moons can be more than 30 evenings apart. This is based on what's called the average synodic period, or the range of synodic periods of the moon. So synodic, the word synodic comes from the word syn, which means together, like synchronized, like synchronicity, like synergy, like synagogue. And nodic comes from the word node. So node is basically a phase. So it means the same phase. So from one full moon to the next full moon, that would be a full synodic period. From one new moon to the next new moon would be a full synodic period. From one quarter moon, waxing quarter to the, or waxing half moon to the next waxing half moon would be a full synodic period. And a synodic period on average is 29 and a half days. This is just an astronomical reality, and can range anywhere from, it changes each month, but can range anywhere from as little as 29.2 days to approximately 29.7 days, I believe is the upper bound. Okay, so that's why we say that no two visible new moons can appear in the sky, or no two new moons can be, whether they appear or not, more than 30 evenings apart. Okay, that's the reasoning behind it. So that accounts for the lunar cycle, the biblical or the Karaite lunar cycle. Let's talk about the solar cycle. So the biblical calendar is what's called a luni-solar calendar. And what does it mean, a luni-solar calendar? It tries to, I always like to describe it as, it tries to juggle two things at once. It tries to account for the lunar cycle. So for instance, if I tell you it's the 15th day of the 4th month, and I'm talking about now the Karaite / biblical calendar, and actually more or less the rabbinical calendar in all fairness, but they might be off by a day or two. But certainly the biblical calendar, if I tell you it's the 15th day of the 4th month, you will know exactly what phase the moon is in, give or take a little bit, but you'll know essentially what phase the moon is in at that point. It's going to be a full moon. If I tell you it's the 7th day of the 1st month, or the 7th day of the 8th month, let's say, then once again, you'll know exactly what phase the moon is going to be in. It's going to be approximately a waxing half full moon. Okay. If I tell you it's the 21st day of the 5th month, you'll know it's a waning half moon, and so on and so forth. So the biblical calendar, as is the rabbinical calendar, but it's both the rabbinical calendar and the biblical calendar are luni-solar calendars. They account for the lunar cycle and they account for the solar cycle. We'll talk about the solar cycle in a second. The difference is that the biblical calendar, Karaite / biblical calendar, is a luni-solar calendar of observation, based on observation, whereas the rabbinical calendar is a luni-solar calendar based on calculation. So the luni-solar calendar based on calculation, although it attempts to account for both the lunar and the solar, the yearly solar cycle, It drifts because every calculated calendar is subject to calendrical drift. Again, you could look at the article that I posted. Whereas the biblical, the perfect calendar, shall we say, the ancient calendar, the Tanakh calendar is not based on calculation. It's based on observation, so it cannot drift. It will automatically correct in a way that I'll talk about in just a second. Okay? Hope that's clear. If it's not, then don't worry about it. The basic bottom line is that the actual calendar of observation for the first month of the year, it was 2 days later. The new moon was observed 2 days later than the rabbinical calendar predicted it to be or declared it to be. Okay, so in terms of the solar year, so because it's a lunisolar calendar, it also attempts to stay synchronized with the solar cycle. So what's an example of a calendar that does not stay synchronized with the solar cycle? That would be the Muslim calendar. The Muslim calendar is a lunar calendar. It's not a lunisolar calendar. It goes only by the new moon. There are 12 months per year. Each of them have their names. For instance, the most famous is Ramadan, right? Is one of the 12 months of the Muslim year. But because it only has 12 months, if you multiply 12 by 29 and a half, you're going to come out with 354. 354 is 11 days less than 365. So it's approximately 11 days less than a solar year, which means that each year the Muslim calendar is going to drop back within the solar cycle by about 11 days. And that's why Ramadan each year, the month of Ramadan, is approximately 11 days earlier than it was the previous year. I remember the first time I visited Morocco 5 times. The first time I went to Morocco in 2013, Ramadan was in August. That's when I went. I went in the middle of Ramadan. And now this year Ramadan was in March. So each year it drops back. It cycles around the solar year until if it's dropping back 11 divided by 365, so 30. So approximately 40 years later, it's going to be back where it started from. Okay, because it's not a lunisolar calendar. But the rabbinical calendar and the biblical calendar and other calendars such as the Chinese calendar, these are lunisolar calendars. And the way that I'm not going to talk anymore about the rabbinical calendar. The way that the Karaite/biblical calendar stays synchronized with the solar cycle is through what we call the Aviv. The Aviv in modern Hebrew, the word Aviv means spring, the springtime, but that's not what the word means in the Torah. What it means in the Torah is a certain stage in the ripeness of seeds from or of plants from the wheat family. So wheat, barley, spelt, rye, etc. Okay, let's take a look at that right now. We're going to go to Exodus chapter 9, verse 31, which also happens to be right in the middle of the Exodus story, which is one of the things that Passover celebrates. So if we go to Exodus chapter 9, verse 31. Okay, I'm going to read it in English, and then we'll take a look what it really says in the Hebrew. So the English says the flax and the barley. So this is speaking about, by the way, the plague of hail. Okay, so let's just get the context. Again, I'll just read the English to save time. So Moses replied, when I have gone out of the city, I will spread out my hands in prayer to the Lord. The thunder will stop, and there will be no more hail, so you may know that the earth is the Lord's. But I know that you and your officials still do not fear the Lord God. And then we get a side note. So the flax, and this is speaking about from the hail. Okay, this is one of the plagues, one of the later plagues. The flax and the barley were destroyed, since the barley had headed and the flax was in bloom. But the wheat and the spelt, however, were not destroyed because they ripen later. That's what it says in the English. We're going to look at the Hebrew. Again, if you want to follow along, that's Exodus chapter 9, verse 31. Bring it up in the Hebrew. So let me read the Hebrew, starting in verse 31. Let's make this a little bit bigger. It's big enough. Okay, so verse 31 says, "Wahapishta, wahaseora nu kapa." Let's translate up until there. So pishta, that's the flax, wahaseora, and the barley, nukata, were destroyed by the hail. We'll go on, ki seora aviv, because the barley was aviv, wahapishta givol, and the flax was budding, or was givol. I'm just going to translate that as budding because we don't need to know what that means right now. The key is that it says that haseora aviv, the barley was aviv. We call this aviv barley. Okay. And let me just go on to the next verse, and then we could start explaining what this is talking about. Verse 32, Wahita kusemet lunuku, but the wheat and the spelt were not destroyed, ki afelot hena, because they were. This comes from the word dark, but really what it's referring to is they were just grasses. They had not yet. So, okay, now we can get into a little bit. If you ever have seen wheat grow or barley grow or any plants from that family, you'll see they start off as grasses, right? You may have gone to your health food store and gotten wheat grass. So they start off as grasses. They look like grass. They are grass, okay? And then eventually what's going to happen is that a stalk is going to grow out of the center of that grass, and that eventually is going to turn into a pods, which in which the seeds of the wheat or the barley will be contained. Okay, so the bottom line is that once the stalk comes out and becomes hard, and the seeds start forming within the little seed pods, then this is approaching, or this is the state of Aviv. So Aviv is a state in the ripeness of the barley. It's when the barley is almost ripe. It's about approximately 2 weeks. Again, I'm not going to get all the details here. We'll go into great detail in the master class on the calendar. But the Aviv is approximately the state of the barley. In this case, we're talking about the barley, because we see it here in Exodus chapter 9, verse 31. It's a state when the barley is almost ripe. It's about 2 weeks before being ripe. And as you can imagine, okay, maybe we can get a picture of ripe barley plants. Okay. Barley field. Images. Okay, so those are barley stalks with the seeds in the seed pods, and you can imagine that because they're becoming brittle, because the stalks are becoming brittle, and because they're approaching ripeness, that if hail were to come down, it could knock those stalks right off. It can destroy the stalks. But if they're still as grasses, okay, let's say barley in the grass stage. Okay, here's an example of the different stages of barley. Okay, so we see it starts as grass, and then eventually the main stalk comes up, and then that stalk is going to eventually, I don't know why this picture doesn't have it, but eventually the main stalk is going to have ripe seeds in it. To make a long story short, what's being spoken about here, or what's being said here in Exodus chapter 9, verse 31, is that the barley was in such a late stage of its development that the hail was able to destroy it. Whereas in verse 32, the wheat and the spelt were not destroyed, they were still in the grass stage. They were still as grasses. And because they were just flexible leaves, the hail did not destroy them. Okay, and that's where we get an idea of what the word Aviv means. We also know that in Israel and the surrounding countries, and I guess maybe everywhere in the world, that the barley is the first crop to ripen. In fact, the festival of Hag HaMazoth, the festival of unleavened bread, is associated with the barley harvest. Then comes the wheat. And the festival of Shavuot, the festival of weeks, which comes approximately 50 days later, is associated with a wheat harvest. Okay, so the wheat at the time of the plague, and we know exactly when the Israelites exited Egypt. They exited on the 15th of the first month. Okay, and this is one of the last plagues. So this is right before, ostensibly a couple of weeks before the actual Exodus. the barley was already in ripe enough stage that when the hail came down, it was able to destroy those stalks. It was able to knock those stalks right off and destroy them. And so the barley was destroyed. But the wheat, which ripens about 1.5 months later, 2 months later, was in a much earlier stage of development. Like over here, these grass stages, and they were not destroyed. Okay. So from this, we know, and now let's talk about why is this relevant. Okay. It's relevant. We're going to go to Exodus chapter 12. Let me do it in the English. Let me just check in and see if there are any questions. So we're going to go now to Exodus chapter 12. Okay, and let's do one thing very quickly so I can save some time afterwards. Let me go back to Exodus chapter 9. We want to look at the different instances of this word. Let me just grab this word. And we can actually even look at some of the the biblical dictionaries, right? So Aviv here is translated as Aviv, ear, green ears of corn meaning grains. Horrible translations, forget that. Let's go to the BDB. Fresh young ears of barley. Okay. Chodesh Aviv, the month of ear forming, the month of growing green, the month of Aviv. Again, these are all horrible translations. I'll explain what all this means. So, okay, let's read this, meaning in agricultural context. So Aviv denotes the stage when the barley kernels have filled and the heads have softened but not yet dried. And if you ever come with us, each year we go out and we look for barley in the stage. We look for Aviv barley, and if you ever come with us, you'll understand in detail what this is speaking about. So the seed pods will start containing seeds. At first, they'll be liquid. You can squeeze in, and it'll be like this clear liquid, and eventually, they'll start getting thicker, more viscous. And if you squeeze them, it'll kind of ooze out. It'll be it'll ooze out. We used to call it the worm stage, like this kind of white worm, and eventually that will start drying out. And so if you squeeze on the barley seed pod, it won't ooze out at all. You have to kind of cut it open with your fingernail, and you'll see it's still soft and white, but not enough to ooze out. And then eventually it's going to completely dry out into a hard barley seed. So this is speaking about that third stage, where it can't be squeezed out, but it still has not completely hardened. It's kind of still soft and white. Okay. At any rate, when the barley kernels are filled and the heads have softened but have not yet dried, it marks a transition from green growth to ripened grain suitable for roasting. Leviticus 2:14. In the land of Israel, this occurs in early spring following the latter rains and signaling the opening of the harvest season. We can even read this. So occurrences and theological significance. Exodus 9:31 links Aviv to the plague of hail. The barley was, they translate it as in the ear, but what that it really says there is the barley was Aviv. When Egypt's crops were smashed, Israel's future provision had already begun to, okay, that's just preaching. We don't need that. Exodus 13:4 establishes Aviv as the month of Israel's departure from bondage. And that's what we want to look at right now. So let's go to Exodus chapter 13, verse 4. And then we'll go back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. But we're looking in Exodus chapter 13, verse 4. And let me bring it up also in the Hebrew. Okay, so if we look at the English, okay, let me start in verse 3 just to get the context. This is Exodus 13. This is basically the right as the Israelites are doing the Exodus. So then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because Yahweh brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Today, in the month of the Aviv, you are leaving. Okay, so we see, and then we're going to go over to the Hebrew. Okay, so speaking about the Exodus, and I'll just translate verse 4. Okay, Hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh aviv. Today you are going out of Egypt in the month of what? In the month of the Aviv. So once again, in modern Hebrew, the word Aviv is usually translated as spring because it occurs in the springtime. Okay? But the word Aviv, again, really means the month in which the barley is almost ripe. The month in which the barley reaches that particular stage where the seeds are not quite ripe, but they're almost ripe. They're not dried out, but they're in the pods. They're still a bit squishy and flexible. They're not yet dried out. It'll take approximately another 2 weeks for them to dry out. Okay, so that's what this means. So I would translate the Chodesh Aviv, the month of the ripening barley, or the month of the almost ripe barley. That's the month we went out in. Okay, and it specifically says, now we go back to Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. Okay, so we know from Exodus 13:4, right? We know that we went out in which month? The month of the almost ripe barley, the month of the ripening barley. And then we have in Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, speaking about the same month in which we're going out of Egypt. Okay. Achodesh hazeh lechem rosh chodashim. This month is for you the head of the months. In other words, this is the new year. This is the first month of the new year. Rishon hu lachem lachodshei hashana. It is the first for you among the months or of the months of the year. So this is explicitly telling us, and this is often cited as the first actual commandment in the Torah, Exodus chapter 12, verse 2. This is telling us explicitly that the month in which we went out of Egypt, that is the beginning of the new year. It's the first month. Okay, Rishon lachem lachodshei hashana. It's the first for you. It's the first of the months of the year. So we know from Exodus chapter 13:4, we went out in Chodesh Aviv. We know from Exodus chapter 9, verse 31 and other places that Aviv means almost ripe barley. Okay. And so we went out in the month of the ripening barley. I'll just call it the ripening barley. So we went out in the month of the ripening barley, and Exodus chapter 12, verse 2 tells us that the month of the ripening barley is the first month of the year. That's when we start the new year. And why is it important to tell us this? Because different cultures have started and start the new year at different times. While springtime is very common, perhaps the most common across the world, there are other examples. Okay, so for instance, the Greeks, I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, I'm pretty sure it's the Greeks. Pretty sure it's the Greeks. They started their year in the fall. They started their year in the autumn, at the end of the agricultural season. Very possibly, don't quote me if it's the Greeks. I'm pretty sure it is. That's very probably where the later rabbis, or why the later rabbis switched over from starting the new year in the spring to what they do now, which is against the Torah, which is not in line with the Torah, where they start the new year in the fall with their false holiday called Rosh Hashanah. So there is a holiday in the Torah called Yom Teruah, Zikaron Teruah, in Exodus chapter 23 and elsewhere, that is on the first day of the 7th month, but the rabbis say that that's the beginning of the new year. That's why they call it the Rosh Hashanah, or they call it the new year. So you'll hear a lot of Jews in September walking around and wishing each other a happy new year, okay? Because the rabbis violated what it says right here, Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, telling us that the month of the Aviv, the month of the ripening barley, the springtime, in the springtime, is the first month of the year. And they followed, again, I believe it was the Greek, I'll have to look it up again, and they followed that way to change it, that the fall was the beginning of the new year. So it's important, and we have other systems as well. We know the Romans, they began their new year in January. That's why in the West, we still begin the new year in January, right? January is essentially the first month after the winter solstice. And so the Romans began their year right after the winter solstice. It was associated with the winter solstice. Okay, so different cultures begin their years at different times, and the Torah is telling us explicitly here: you're going to begin your year at the time when the barley is ripening. That is your new year. It's not in the fall, like the rabbis changed it to be, violating the Torah. It's not associated with the winter solstice as the Romans and as the Western world does up until this day. So it's a new year with the winter solstice. January 1st is just 11 days after the winter solstice, approximately, right? So So it's when the barley is ripening. That's when you start your new year. What does this all have to do with the Karaite calendar and with when we declare Passover? Well, we know Passover is the 15th day of the first month. We know the first month must occur when the barley is almost ripe, and so therefore this is what corrects the I won't say corrects. This is how we observe the solar year, the solar cycle, the 365 and a quarter approximately cycle in which the Earth travels around the sun each year. This is how we keep it in line. This is how it doesn't drift off like the Muslim calendar does. Because each year we go out, and if the barley is not ripe, then we do not declare the new month or the next month to be the new month. So let's take a concrete example. And again, I don't want to go too deep into the grass. No pun intended. So let's take a concrete example. And so if we say, let's say 1 year, let's start with the year 2020. I'm just making these dates up, but let's say in 2020, the first month was declared, the first biblical month was declared on April 1st, 2020. Again, I'm just making these dates up, okay? We go around 12 months. 12 months later, it's going to be approximately 354 days later. It's going to be 11 days less than 365 days. So we drop back like the Muslims would 11 days. So April 1st, 2020 was the first month of the year, the secular year 2020. Now, 12 months later, we're back into April 1st minus 11 days. So that's going to be approximately March 19th, let's say. So March 19th, 2021 would be 12 months later, would be the end of 12 full lunar months. Each of those months declared by observation of the visible new moon in the sky, or by default, if 30 days have passed. So 12 months have passed. We go out a day or two before, or whenever before, a couple of days before. We look around the land of Israel to see if there's Aviv barley, to see if barley is almost ripe. If we find Aviv barley is almost ripe, then that next month will be declared, that next month, which would start on the 19th of March 2021. Again, I'm making all these dates up, but just to illustrate it, which starts on March 19th, 2021. That would now be the first month of the new biblical year within 2021. Again, I'm using the secular year 2021. Okay. So let's say that happens. Let's say we find almost ripe barley on March 18th. We go out March 19th, 2021, look up in the evening sky. We see the new moon. Boom. That now becomes the first month of the new year because it's the first visible new moon after we found Aviv barley in the land of Israel. Okay, great. We now go to the next year. Another 12 months pass. Another 354 days pass. 11 days less than 365 days. So we drop back another 11 days. Again, this is all approximate and just to illustrate the point. So now we're in the year 2022. The previous first day of the first month was, we said March 19th, 2021. 19 minus 11 is 8. So now we're back to March 8th, 2022. We go out a day or two before, let's say on March 6th or March 7th. We look for Aviv barley. We find it. Great. We look up in the night sky on March, where are we up to? March 8th, 2022. We see the new moon. We declare, therefore, that new moon is the first month of the new year of the secular year 2022. Okay, so far so good. Let's go one more year. Okay, so now we're in 2023. We add another 354 days, another 12 months. That's 11 short of 365 days. We're dropping back, just like the Muslims. Their Ramadan drops back 11 days each year. We're dropping back. So now we're in 2023. Our previous new year was March, did we say 9th? I believe so. It doesn't matter. March 9th, 2022. So 9 minus 11. So now we're back 2 days into February. So now it's February 27th, 2023. We go out a day or two before on February 26th. We look around for Aviv barley. We look around for almost barley. We don't find it. It's too early in the year. It's too early in the year. We don't find the ripened barley. We don't find the Aviv barley. Okay. So what happens? We get to the 26th of February, 2023. We haven't found ripe barley, almost ripe barley. So we cannot declare that month to be the first month of the new year of the secular year 2023. what happens? We that month now becomes the 13th month of the previous year. Okay, it's a leap year, but it's not a leap year by calculation. The rabbinical calendar of calculation does it based on a cycle of 7 leap years every 7 leap years every cycle of 19 years, based on something called the Metonic cycle. We won't go into it right now. Okay, but we don't do that. We go out. If we don't find the Aviv barley, then the next month cannot be declared as the first month of the new year. So again, using our example, it's February 26, 2023. We haven't found the Aviv barley. 12 months have passed. So now February 26th, in the evening, we go out, we see the new moon. We do not declare it the new year, the first month of the new year. Instead, we declare it as the 13th month of the previous year. And that way the system naturally corrects itself. This now becomes a leap year. An extra month is added. This bumps us up to the next new moon, which is going to be, let's say, 30 days later. So February 26th, 30 days later. Okay, February is 28 days. So we'll say it's March 28th or something like that. We go out March 28th or just before March 28th, March 27th, 2023. We look for Aviv barley. Now it's later in the season. It's a month later in the season. We find it. We go out in the evening sky, March 28th. In the evening, we look for the new moon. We find it. Boom. That now becomes the first month of the new year. The previous year, it turns out, has 13 months, and the new year starts on March 20. What's the example we're giving? 28th, 2023, and so on and so forth. So the point is that because we're reading the signs in the sky for the new moon, and we're reading the signs on the ground, the almost ripe barley, the Aviv barley, the system naturally corrects itself. It doesn't predict cycles, it reads cycles, and therefore it's a self-correcting system, and can never get out of sync. Okay, and that's the way the system works. So it is a luni-solar calendar, but it's a luni-solar calendar of observation, and therefore it's not subject to calendrical drift. Only calendars of calculation, such as the Julian calendar, such as even the Gregorian calendar, such as the rabbinical calendar, these are subject to calendrical drift. And in fact, the rabbinical calendar is subject to calendrical drift on both cycles, both the lunar cycle and the solar cycle. If you read the article, which I posted the link to before, you'll see exactly what I mean by that. But the biblical calendar, which is not based on calculation, but is based on observation, is not subject to calendrical drift. It's a self-correcting calendar. And that's the situation that we have. Okay? Any questions about that? So to make a long story short, this past month was not a 13th month year. This past year was not a 13th month year. It's been 12 months since the previous new year. Okay, and we were able to find Aviv barley. Next year, the new year in 2027 will drop back again. So if it's March 20th, it'll drop back again, approximately 11 days. So that new moon will be around March 9th or so, 2027. That's already getting kind of early. We might not yet find Aviv barley in the land of Israel by March 9th, 2027. So then we'll have to add a 13th month, and that will push the system. That will keep the system in sync with the solar year. So the barley, the Aviv barley, is what keeps the system in sync with the solar year. The observation of the crescent new moon in the evening sky is what keeps the system in sync with the lunar cycle. So it's in sync with the solar cycle and the lunar cycle. It doesn't predict them, it observes them and reads them. Okay? Any questions? And any questions about why Passover now this year falls out 2 days later than rabbinical, and again, I'm using the colloquial word Passover, why it falls out later, 2 days later than rabbinical Passover this year, and why it starts once again on tomorrow night. Bring that up. Okay. Let's bring this one up for a change. Okay, why it starts on tomorrow night rather than last night. Any questions? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Okay, so let's move on to a different subject. Let's move on to something practical, okay? So let's talk about what we're able to eat and what we're not able to eat on Passover, okay? So there are 2 things that are mentioned. And by the way, here's a list of all the laws regarding Passover in the entire Torah. Okay. So let's see where we want to start off. Let's do this. So we're going to go to Exodus chapter 12 once again. Okay, so first of all, we should speak about what the difference is between Passover, the word Passover, and the word Hag HaMazoth. So the two are intimately related, but they are different. Okay, so the Passover, the Pesach in Hebrew, is the offering. It's the lamb that is slaughtered in that first year when the Israelites were in Egypt, as we see here. Again, I'll just read in the English to save some time. Exodus chapter 2, 12, verse 3. Tell the whole community of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, okay, meaning, once again, we now know the month of the Aviv. So on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. And we know the story. Okay, let's just pick it up here in verse 6. Take them until the 14th day of the month, when all the members of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. So 14th month at twilight. That's when the 14th month is, the 14th day at twilight of the first month. That's when the 14th day is ending and the 15th day is beginning. They have to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night, they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire along with bitter herbs and bread without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or boiled in water, but roast it over a fire, etc. Do not leave any of it till the morning. Eat it with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So this is speaking about that first offering when the Israelites were still in Egypt. And they were told by Yahweh to slaughter a sheep or a goat, to take the blood, to dip hyssop into it. It doesn't say here the hyssop, but it mentions elsewhere. To dip hyssop into it, mentions it below, and to spread the blood on the side, the doorposts and the upper post of the door. I think it's technically called the doorposts and the lintel, L-I-N-T-E-L. So all around the doorposts, basically. And then when the destroying angel, HaMashchit, it's called in Hebrew, comes through the land at midnight, then the destroying angel will see the blood on the doorposts of the Israelites and pass over and not kill the Israelites. We all know the story. We've all seen the movie a million times. The point being that offering, that first lamb that was slaughtered by the Israelites on the 14th day of the first month as the sun was setting, or just after the sun set, I should say, that was the original Passover offering. That's the Pesach, and we see it right here in verse 11. Let's go over to Exodus chapter 12, verse 11, and look at it in the Hebrew. Okay, so we'll just take this. Okay, Pesach hu liYahweh. It is the Pesach. It is the Passover to Yahweh, and this tells us right now what the word Pesach means. The Pesach is not the name of the holiday that we celebrate afterwards. It's the name of the offering. It's the name of that particular sacrifice. Just as when we were learning in Leviticus, we may have a sacrifice that is called an olah, a burnt offering or fully burnt offering. We may have a sacrifice that's called a shlamim, a peace or a fellowship offering. We may have a sacrifice that's called nasham, usually translated as a guilt offering. There are different types of offering. This one actually has the name, the Pesach. It is the Passover offering. It is the offering of that asks us, or asks Yahweh's destroying angel to pass over the houses of the Israelites. So whenever you see the word Pesach, anywhere in the entire Tanakh, it means one thing and one thing only. It means the offering. It is not the name of the holiday. Okay, now we do see, by the way, let's find it. Okay, verse 8. You shall eat the meat of the Passover offering that night, meaning after the sun has already set, the 14th now becomes the 15th, so the night of the 15th. Okay, tzli ish, roasted over fire, umatzot al mirorim yochluhu, and you shall eat it with matzot, with unleavened bread, along with bitter herbs or bitter things. You shall eat it. So we already have matzot to be eaten with that Passover offering. So we already see here a relationship between the Passover offering and matzot. By the way, it's fair to say that, as if you remember, as we learned in Leviticus, in the initial chapters of Leviticus, that all fire offerings, okay, which means any offering that's thrown on the altar of sacrifice, must be accompanied only with matzah. It's not allowed to be accompanied with leavened bread. Okay, so that's something that carries on over to the other offerings as well. Okay, so all of the fire offerings, any of the offerings that are burnt, and this is an offering that's burnt. This first offering is not burnt up at the tabernacle. There was no tabernacle yet. It's burnt in the houses, or it's roasted in the houses of the Israelites. Okay, but it's a burnt offering. Okay, in fact, it's a fully burnt offering. Everything is roasted. Well, different, because in the fully burnt offering, nothing is eaten by the person who brings it, but it's a burnt offering. Okay, and burnt offerings, as we saw in Leviticus, are always accompanied with unleavened bread, with matzot, and there's no exception here. This burnt offering, this Passover offering, is accompanied with unleavened bread. So it's the first occurrence, the first relationship we see between the Passover offering and the idea of matzot. But the idea of matzot, and by the way, again, I should translate matzot. I'm sure pretty much everyone knows what matzah means, but it means unleavened bread. It means bread that does not have a leavening agent such as concentrated yeast added to it. And we'll talk a lot more about that in a second. Let me just check in and see if there are any questions. Okay. Okay, so the basic bottom line is here is the name Pesach, the name Passover is the name of the offering. Now, the offering is immediately followed by a 7-day holiday later on. In that first year, there is no 7-day holiday because the Israelites had to get out of Dodge. Okay, so we have that original Passover, and then we have the commemoration of that original Passover. So let's talk a little bit about the commemoration of the original Passover. Okay, to do that, we'll switch over to the English. So these, I'm not going to go through them all right now, but these, starting in verse 43 and going through 51, no, really going through 48, okay? These are the regulations for the Passover offering in future times. So the Passover offering in future times is to be brought, and on that same day, meaning the 14th of the first month after the sun sets, when the 14th is becoming the 15th, Ben Arba'im, it's to be brought on the 14th of the first month after the sun sets each year. Okay? And that's the Passover offering. And then immediately following it, so the 14th is now becoming the 15th, the switchover of, as we know, of Hebrew days occurs in the evening, occurs after sunset. So the 14th now becomes the 15th, and right when it becomes fully dark, I won't get into all the details right now, again, when we speak more about the calendar, then not in this class, but in a different class, then we can get into great detail. But now, right after you bring the Passover offering, in fact, I would claim right after you sacrifice the Passover offering, that's when Hag HaMazoth starts. That's when the Festival of Unleavened Bread starts. It's a 7-day holiday, and on it, we're restricted from eating leavened bread. And that harkens back to two things. That harkens back to what we saw here in Exodus chapter 12, verse, where was it? 8, right? That we eat the Passover offering with unleavened bread. And it also harkens back to the story. Let me find it. Okay, we're going to start here. Just 1 second. Okay, let's just start here. Okay, actually, let me find the other verse. 1 second. Let's go here. So, verse 34. This is Exodus chapter 12, verse 34. So, it's speaking about the Israelites now actually leaving Egypt. Okay. So the nation, it says, the people, talking about the people of Israel, carried their dough. Terem yehmatz. Yehmatz, you can see, is related to the word chametz. Okay, before it had a chance to leaven. So they carried their dough before it had a chance to leaven. Mish'arotam tzururot b'simlotam, with their kneading bowls. And there, in that word mish'arotam, we have the word sa'or, which is we'll get to also. So with their kneading bowls wrapped in their clothes, al shichmam, on their shoulders. So the Israelites left Egypt with dough in kneading bowls on their shoulders. And then it says when they got out into the desert, pick it up here in verse 37. Okay. Why is Uben Israel me Ramses Sukkot? So they traveled, the children of Israel traveled from Ramses. Ramses, we know, is one of the two Arei Mishkanot, the two storage cities that they built, Ramses and Pitom. Okay. So they traveled from Ramses, meaning they left Egypt, where they were living, in Goshen, Sukkota, towards Sukkot. Approximately 600,000 men, not counting the children. We can skip this. Verse 39. And when they got to Sukkot, when they got out of Egypt, they baked the dough that they had taken out of Egypt into ugot matzot, into cakes of unleavened bread. Kilo hametz, because it did not leaven. It did not have time to leaven. Ki gorashumi mitzrayim, because they were thrown out hastily from Egypt. Velo yachlu litmamea, and they couldn't wait around. They couldn't hang around anymore, right? V'gam seida lo asu lahem. Anyway, that's not relevant. Okay, that last part. But the basic bottom line is when they got out into the desert, when they made it from Ramses to Sukkot, out in the desert, that's when they, remember it said earlier that they took their unleavened dough in the kneading bowls wrapped in their clothes on their shoulders, and now they get out into the desert. They get out to their first destination, Sukkot, and they take this unleavened dough and they bake it into matzot. So this is a second connection that we have between the Exodus story and matzot, right? So now we have double. And as I always like to say, the Torah always likes to give multiple meanings, or I call it multi-layered meanings to symbols, words, and sometimes names. Beersheva is another example, where Sheva either means 7, based on 7 ewes that were given as pikadon, or oath, right? So there's a multiple layered meaning. And here, the matzah, the connection between matzah and the Exodus story has multiple layers of meaning. And we'll see a third layer afterwards, okay? But so far we see 2 layers of meaning. One, the matzah was eaten with that original Passover offering, with that original Pesach in the houses of the Israelites. And number 2, when they got out into the desert to Sukkot, they did not, the bread that they carried with them, or the dough that they carried with them, had not yet had time to become leavened. And so when they baked it, they were hungry, I guess, after running out of Egypt, right? They baked it into matzot. So it's a double connection so far that we have between the Exodus story and matzot, and unleavened bread. Let me just check in to see if there are any questions. Okay. Any questions? Any comments so far? Okay. All right. So, okay. So the point being, we were talking about the name of Passover. The name Passover always refers to the Passover offering. we see it's connected, or the entire Exodus story has now been connected twice to matzot, to unleavened bread, and therefore directly following the Passover offering, in not that original year, they didn't celebrate a holiday of unleavened bread in the original year, but in all the following years, they celebrate a 7-day holiday, which is not called Passover. It's not called Pesach. It's called the Festival of Unleavened Bread. And let's take a look at that. We can go to the English for a second. Okay. We're going back in Exodus 12. Okay, in verse 17. So celebrate the Festival of Unleavened Bread, because it was on this very day that I brought your divisions out of Egypt. On what very day? On the 15th of the first month. Celebrate this day as a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. In the first month, you are to eat bread made without yeast from the evening of the 14th day until the evening of the 21st day. For 7 days, no yeast is to be found in your houses, and anyone, whether foreigner or native born, who eats anything with yeast in it must be cut off from the community of Israel. You eat nothing made with yeast. Wherever you live, you must eat unleavened bread. Let's look a little bit at in the Hebrew at that. That's verse 17. Okay. I'm going to start in verse 14. So this day shall be for you as a day of remembrance. Speaking about which day? The day of the Exodus from Egypt, the 15th day of the first month. Right? And you shall celebrate it as a holiday, as a yearly holiday to Yahweh, throughout your generations. As an eternal statute, you must celebrate it. Verse 15. For 7 days you must eat only unleavened bread. But by the first day you must have removed all seor, and we'll get to that in a while, in just a bit, leavening agent from your house. Because anyone who eats leavened bread during these 7 days, that person shall be cut off, shall be excommunicated from Israel. From the first day through the 7th day, if you eat unleavened bread, you are excommunicated. You're excised from the community of Israel, from the nation of Israel. Okay. Verse 16. This is reiterated in other places, such as Exodus chapter 23. On the first day is a declaration of a holy gathering. And on the 7th day, a holy gathering or a holiday shall be declared. You shall not do any work on these 2 days, except that which is required for food preparation. I'm paraphrasing. That's the only thing that may be done. Right? Verse 17. And now we get the name of the holiday. Shmartem et matzot, and you shall keep, and here it says matzot, right? The matzahs, but it's really a shorthand for Hag HaMazoth. And we see that again in Exodus chapter 23. You shall keep the festival of unleavened bread. Keep the etzem hayom hazeh, because on this very day, meaning on the 15th of the first month, I took your armies out of the land of Egypt. Right? Because we see that the Israelites traveling in the desert are likened to an army. They almost are like an army. And you'll keep this day, again, speaking really about the first day here, but for the 7 days, you should keep these days throughout your generations as an eternal statute. Verse 18, this is Exodus chapter 12, verse 18. On the first month, or in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, in the evening, this means after the sun sets on the 14th day, the 14th is now becoming the 15th, without getting into all the details, and I have many discussions with many people about this. The time between sunset and what I call maximal darkness, I think technically they call it nightfall, so about an hour period between when the sun dips below the western horizon and when the sky becomes dark, or as dark as it's going to be that night. Of course, there's stars, there's moon, there might be city lights, etc. But as dark as it's going to get that night, that's called in Hebrew, that's called Ben Arba'im in biblical Hebrew. usually translated as evening, but really what it is, Bena Arba'im, it really is the mixing time. That's really what the etymology of the word is, and it's kind of not quite day and not quite night. And during that mixing time, again, evening, what we call in English evening, during evening, the day can be referred to either as the 14th or the 15th. It's not quite the 14th and it's not quite the 15th. It's the 14th becoming the 15th. And so it becomes context. So here it says, Rishon ba'arba asari yom lechodesh ba'erev, and I'll translate this as in the first month, on the 14th day of the month, ba'erev, after the sun sets, tochlu matzot ad yom echad esrim lechodesh ba'erev. You will eat unleavened bread until the 21st day at sunset. Okay, or on 21st day, maybe until of maximal darkness. You're eating matzot, unleavened bread. Shivat yamim or lo yimatzeh bevatechem. For 7 days, or we're going to talk about this word or much more, but I'm just translating it now as concentrated leavening agent. So yeast, maybe I'll just translate it most easily now as yeast. Yeast shall not be found in your houses. Because anyone who eats yeast, and machmetzet is really it's the same as a chametz, or maybe perhaps the same as seor, really the same as chametz. So anyone who eats chametz, anyone who eats leavened bread, that person shall be excommunicated, shall be excised from the community of Israel. Whether you are a native born or a quote unquote convert. Okay. And you shall not eat any leavened bread. But you shall only eat unleavened bread for those 7 days. Okay. So that holiday is called, we see right here, it's called matzot. Let's find again the verse where it calls it matzot. One second. I can't find it right now, but it was up above, right? So we see the holiday is called Hag HaMazoth, or it's called matzot. Okay? So that's the difference between the word Passover, the word Pesach, and the word matzot. The word Pesach is referring to the Passover offering, and the word matzot, or the word Hag HaMazoth, is referring to the 7-day holiday, which comes on the heels of the bringing of the Passover offering. Okay, so the holiday, the 7-day holiday, is not called the Passover. It's not called Hag Pesach. There is one place in the Torah where we see the phrase Hag Pesach, but the name of the holiday is not Hag Pesach or the Passover holiday. The name of the holiday is the festival of unleavened bread. It's Hag HaMatzot. It's the festival of unleavened bread. Okay. Any questions? Anybody have any questions or comments so far? Anybody? Okay, if not, let's go on and talk about some practical things. Okay, so we saw here in these verses that there are 2 things which we're not allowed to have during the holiday. Okay. Let's find it. So we have here, let's start right here. So we're in Exodus chapter 12. Let's start in, we'll just do verse 19. Okay, so we are in Exodus chapter 12, verse 19. And what it says in Exodus chapter 12, 19 is for 7 days, or lo yimatzeh bebatechem. You shall not, no yeast shall be found in your houses. Let's take a look at this word seor. So in order to understand what the word sa'or is, so they translate it as leaven, barm or yeast cake. It's essentially what we would call in this day and age sourdough starter. Okay, so anyone who's ever made bread at home, or anyone who knows about making bread, knows that you cannot make bread unless you have a concentrated leavening agent. So if you've ever made sourdough bread, you know you have to use a sourdough starter. What is a sourdough starter? A sourdough starter is a small amount of dough that has a very high concentration of, it's not only yeast, but we'll just call it yeast. It's yeast, bacteria, other organisms that will cause the bread to leaven. Okay, so that's what sa'or is. So sa'or is concentrated leavening agent. So if you're not making sourdough bread, maybe you're going to go to the store and you're going to buy yeast. Maybe you'll buy dry inactive yeast, which they usually sell in a little plastic bag, and it looks like little crystals. It almost looks like semolina or something like that. Or maybe you're going to buy fresh yeast, which usually comes like in a little cube, and you open it up. It has a little bit of a yeasty smell to it. Okay, but whatever you do, if you're making bread, the way you do it, the most basic way you do it is you take flour, you take water, and of course you add other things like salt and whatever else you want to add. You have to add a little salt or else it's going to grow out of control. At any rate, you take flour, you take water, and you take this concentrated yeast and you add it to the dough, and then you knead it, and then you let the dough rise. You need that concentrated leavening agent in order for the dough to rise. If it's sourdough bread, that's going to be a sourdough starter. If it's, we'll call regular bread that you bake, then it's going to be yeast that you buy at the store, concentrated yeast that you buy at the store, either the dry inactive yeast or those wet little cubes of yeast. If it's muffins, let's say, then it's going to be baking powder, or it could be baking powder combined with baking soda. So the four main leavening agents that we find in the modern world are yeast. We'll start with sourdough starter, if you're making sourdough bread. And a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have even included that. I used to say there are three main leavening agents: yeast, baking powder, baking soda. But nonetheless, now there are four, since making sourdough bread has become so popular over recent years. So sourdough starter, or the yeast that you buy in the store, or baking powder, or baking soda. These are all concentrated leavening agents. When they're added to dough, they will cause the dough to rise. Okay, and without going into all the details, the way they cause the dough to rise is they expel gases, they expel carbon dioxide into the dough. That carbon dioxide is trapped by the gluten. The gluten is a protein within the dough, and anyone who makes their own bread knows that the more you knead the dough, the more the gluten strands develop, and they're able to better hold in those bubbles. So at any rate, the bubbles are the bubbles of carbon dioxide that are expelled by the various biological, eggs cannot be a leavening agent. They do not leaven. They may add volume, but they're not a leavening agent. Okay? They don't leaven bread. Leavening is a very specific process. Leavening is a process by which the sugars in the dough, in the flour, are consumed. And as a result of that, there are a number of byproducts, such as, I believe, lactic acid, if I'm not mistaken. And one of them is carbon dioxide gas. And when this carbon dioxide gas is expelled, it gets trapped in bubbles in the dough. And this is why the dough rises. Okay? So that's a leavening agent. Sourdough starter, yeast that you buy at the store, baking powder, or baking soda. Those are your four main leavening agents in the modern world. And if you add any of them to dough that has gluten in it, and even some that don't, we'll talk about that in a second, then that dough is going to rise and you're going to get leaven. If you do not add a concentrated leavening agent, and anyone again who's baked bread knows, then you will not get leaven. You will not get leavened bread. You will not get chametz. You will get matzah. It really doesn't even matter how long you let the dough sit. If I take flour and I mix it with water and I let it sit for a day, even if the temperature is warm, that dough will not rise. It may expand a little bit because the water is now puffing up the flour, but it's not leavening. It's not developing bubbles. It's not leavening. Okay, you can even leave it for 2 or even 3 days. It's not going to leaven. If you do not have concentrated leavening agent, you are not able to leaven bread. So leavened bread, chametz, it's called in Hebrew, is a combination of water, flour, and leavening and concentrated leavening agent. That is what chametz is. And if any of those are missing, you will not get chametz. So now we can get into some more practical laws, some more practical halachot. Okay, so can you make your own matzah? Let's step aside from some of the more theoretical stuff and let's get into some practical things. Okay, can you make your own matzah during Passover? Absolutely. It's so simple. It's much simpler than making bread. All you have to do is go to the store, buy flour. Yes, we're going to talk about the 18 minutes, which is a bunch of baloney. Okay, so all you have to do is go to the store, buy flour. It does not have to be special flour. It doesn't have to be kosher for Passover flour or anything like that. The kosher for Passover flour is essentially what they're trying to do is they're trying to make sure that that the flour has not gotten wet, because the rabbis incorrectly believe that if flour gets wet, then it's going to cause it to leaven. That's not true on a number of levels. Okay. First of all, if flour gets wet, it won't leaven. We know that. Without a concentrated leavening agent, the flour will not leaven. So if you have a bunch of flour and you add, let's say you have you could try it on your own. Let's say, I think you're being funny, Christian. But let's say you take some flour and you drip some drops of water on the flour and you leave it. Is that going to turn into leavened bread? Of course not. What it's going to do is the flour itself is the flour where the drops of water formed on it. It may that particular flour with the moisture may start fermenting a little bit, but it's not dough and it's not going to leaven. Okay, it's going to clump, so you can easily sift it out. Okay, try doing it sometime. Take some drops of water, take some flour, take some drops of water on it. Leave it there for a little while, and then sift it out, and you'll see that those have turned into clumps. So you're easily going to be able to sift it out. And not only that, it hasn't leavened. Okay, yes, the moisture may cause a slight fermentation process to begin, but that's not the same as leavening, because without a concentrated leavening agent, you cannot leaven. It's different. Fermentation is not the same as leavening. It's 2 different processes. Okay, leavening is a very specific process. On top of that, if you buy flour in the store, they've already done that for you. If you buy a bag of flour in the store, they've already made sure that you're not getting wet flour. Let's say the flour was left in the storehouse and it got wet. They're gonna throw that bunch out because it's gonna go rotten, parts of it. If you wet flour and let it sit on a plate for a couple of days, you'll see that it's gonna rot. It's not gonna rise. It's not going to become a concentrated leavening agent. Anyone who's made sourdough starter knows there's a whole process to making sourdough starter. You have to take flour and water and sometimes sugar, and then you let it sit, and then you take part of it, and then you discard the other part, and then you add more water and you add more sugar and more flour, and you keep on doing it because you over time want to get the right concentration of yeast and bacteria that are going to form a concentrated leavening agent. That is not the same as just wetting flour. Okay, so you don't have to worry about any special kosher for Passover flour. You don't have to buy any special kosher for Passover matzah or anything like that. You can go to the store, you can buy a bag of flour anytime you want in the middle of Passover. It doesn't even have to be kosher flour, for God's sakes. It's flour. What do you think is going to be in it? Pig bones? No. Okay, you just go to the store, you buy a bag of flour, you take it home. You take some flour, put it in a bowl, add some water to it. You can add a little bit of salt to it. Do not add a leavening agent to it, right? And add some spices to it if you like. I know the Egyptian Karaites, they will add coriander seed to it. That's traditional. And then you just knead it into a dough, roll it out flat, pop it in the, you have two choices at this point, actually more than two choices, but I'll give you the two most common choices. You roll it out flat, then you, like a pancake, very thin, because it is going to, if you make it too thick in the oven, it's going to be kind of like uncooked on the inside, very thin, thinner than you think. Pop it in the oven, and then that's it. You have matzah. Whenever it's ready, it's gonna cook very quickly, maybe in about 10 or 12 minutes, because it's thin. Okay, you can make it thicker if you want, but it's not going to be cooked on the inside because it's not risen. It doesn't have those air bubbles. It's going to be like a thick gooey mess on the inside. Okay, or you could just take it and you don't even have to put it in the oven. You could take it, you can flatten it out, and you can put it in a pan. You can dry fry it in a pan, or you can add some oil to it and fry it in a pan. And then you get kind of a nice olive oil flatbread. Or you can add more water to the flour, and instead of making it a dough, you can make it into a batter. So you take you take flour, you take water, you turn it into a batter, into like a pancake batter. No leavening agent, once again, right? When you usually make pancakes, what do they usually add to the pancakes? They'll add baking powder or baking soda or both to the pancakes. You don't add the concentrated leavening agent. You just take the water, the flour, add whatever spices you want. You can add a little bit of olive oil. You can add, again, if you like cumin seeds, you can add that. If you like whatever spices you like, and then you just pour it as a batter into a frying pan with or without oil, and you cook it as an unleavened pancake, and that's also matzah. All of these are different types of matzah. Anything that is cooked bread that does not have a concentrated leavening agent, which again, the four main types of concentrated leavening agents in this day and age are sourdough starter, yeast that you would buy in the store, baking powder, baking soda. If it doesn't have any of those four leavening agents in it, then it is not, the end result will not be leavened bread. Okay? Any questions about that so far? So that's what I do. It's Passover. I go to the store, I buy flour. I usually take it, I'll put it in a bowl, I'll add some water. Sometimes I'll add some olive oil, I'll add some spices, a little bit of salt. I'll knead it. I'll take a handful of it, roll it out nice and thin. Awesome. Yeah, and just play around with it. I roll it out nice and thin, pop it in the oven. Actually, what I would recommend is if you want it, is pre-perforating it before you roll it in the oven. So almost like they do with a baklava. If you've ever made baklava, before they put it in the oven, they'll slice it, right? They'll put the indentations in it in diamond shape or in square shape or whatever. It's going to be much easier to handle if you pre-perforate it, so you can cut some lines in it, like squares. You can cut like squares into it, not all the way through, but just enough to perforate it to make indentations. Pop it in the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes, depending on how thin or how thick it is. That's it. You've got nice fresh matzah. Okay, that's it. That's what matzah is. No leavening agent. It's bread without leavening agent. It is bread. It's lechem. It's bread, but it's not leavened bread. It's unleavened bread. Okay. Any questions about that? Okay, so let's talk about some other practical things. Okay. So we said, so we don't have to do anything the way the rabbis told us to do it. Do you think in ancient Israel they went to the supermarket and looked for kosher for Passover symbol and only if it was stamped with the kosher Passover symbol they ate it, and the kosher Passover symbol was wheat that had been watched from the time it was picked or even before the time it was picked to make sure that not a single drop of water got onto it? Of course not. They lived like normal human beings. They milled flour. They didn't add leavening agent to it if they were making matzah. And as we said plenty of times, the Israelites made matzah outside of the quote unquote Passover season because they needed matzot for, first of all, they ate it, but also they needed to accompany other sacrifices that we learned about in the book of Leviticus. Okay, so you don't need to do any of that stuff. Okay, 18 minutes. Do you have to take the dough and put it in the oven within 18 minutes? Absolutely not. No, absolutely not. Dough without concentrating leavening agent will not leaven in any way, shape, or form, or in any perceptible way, shape, or form in 18 minutes. And it won't leaven in an hour, and it won't leaven in 2 hours, and it won't leaven in a day, and it won't even leaven in 2 or 3 days. Because if you do not have a concentrated leavening agent in there, once again, either sourdough starter, yeast, baking powder, or baking soda, you will not get a leavening effect. There's just not a high enough concentration of yeast and bacteria for it to be able to leaven. Okay? And what's my proof for that? The proof that's always given is the story we read. And let's go back here to Exodus chapter 12. So we saw in Exodus chapter 12, verse 34, I'll just read in the English to save some time here, and because we already spoke about it. So the people took their dough before the yeast was added, right? Before the yeast was added. We should look at that before what was added. Let's look at that in the Hebrew. That's Exodus chapter 12, verse 34. Okay. Okay, so before it had a chance to rise. Okay. And they translated it as before the yeast was added, which I guess kind of makes sense, and carried it on their shoulders in kneading troughs wrapped in clothing. So they left Egypt with unleavened dough, with dough without leavening agent, or that had not yet had time to leaven, but we're going to say without leavening agent on their shoulders. That's how they walked out of Egypt. Again, we see that connection between unleavened bread and the exodus from Egypt. And then it says they went from Ramses to Sukkot. Ramses is in Egypt. Sukkot is outside of Egypt. It's already out in the desert, in the wilderness. So with the dough the Israelites had brought from Egypt, they baked loaves of matzot. They baked doughs of unleavened bread. The dough was without yeast because they had been driven out of Egypt and did not have time to prepare food for themselves. Let's look at that in the Hebrew. That's verse 39. So they traveled from Ramses to Sukkot. They baked the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, ugot matzot, into cakes of matzah, into matzah cakes, into loaves of matzah, unleavened bread, kilo chametz, because it did not leaven, or had not had any leavening agent added to it, ki gurshu mitzrayim, because they'd been kicked out of Egypt, v'lo yachlu litmameh, and they couldn't wait around. V'gam seida lo asu lehem. Okay, so the point is, they went from inside Egypt, from Ramses, to outside Egypt to Sukkot. And then they'd taken the dough that they took out of Egypt with them when they got out to Sukkot, when they got out into the middle of the wilderness, they took it and they baked it into unleavened bread. Okay, so unless they were able to get from Ramses to Sukkot in 18 minutes, then matzah can still be baked from dough after it's been sitting around for more than 18 minutes. Okay, so this right here exposes the ridiculousness of the rabbinical idea of 18 minutes, and I think even some of the smarter, or shall I say more cunning rabbis are now trying to downplay this, and whatever. We won't get into it. The former rabbi of mine is, anywho. But even if we didn't have this, it's just logical. If you know anything about bread baking, and I know more and more people getting into bread baking, you know that if you do not have a concentrated leavening agent, you can let it sit for an hour, 2 hours, 10 hours, 2 days. It will not rise. It may puff up a slight, tiny drop, but any food will, okay? But it's not coming from a leavening process. It's not coming from a leavening process, okay? It's really coming from moisture being absorbed, probably more than anything else, okay? Right, I know about that. Now there's one rabbi that says 3 days, whatever. It doesn't matter, because the rabbis are realizing how stupid their 18-minute rule is, and people are catching on to it, so they're getting a little bit wiser and they're backtracking, okay? So you do not have to cook the dough within 18 minutes. It's insanity. It's ridiculous. You can let the dough sit as long as it does not have a concentrated leavening agent in it. You can let it sit for an hour, 2 hours, even a day. No problem whatsoever, as long as there's no leavening agent. And try it yourself. You'll see. It won't rise. It's just going to sit there like a lump, because that's what it is. You need concentrated leavening agent for the dough to rise. Okay, let's talk about some other things. Let's talk about, so how do you know? There are a whole bunch of foods that the rabbis say are forbidden on Passover, which are not forbidden on Passover. So how do you know what foods are forbidden on Passover and what foods are not forbidden on Passover? Well, let's talk about some foods that are not forbidden on Passover. The example that I give that shocks most people is pasta. There is no problem with eating pasta on Passover. Again, it's very helpful if people understand how food is, how various foods are produced. I happen to be very into this because many years I've been into cooking and reading ingredients and stuff like that, and I'll talk about that in a second, about reading the ingredients on food. But pasta, if you just go to the store and buy a bag of pasta, buy a bag of macaroni, it's not leavened bread. It's all it is. Usually, if you look at pasta, it's going to have a single ingredient, and that ingredient is usually durum wheat flour. Okay, that's it. You would have to look very hard to find a pasta with any kind of leavening agent in it. You may find egg noodles, which then is going to have two ingredients generally. I'm not including water, which is going to be flour and eggs. But eggs, once again, do not cause leavening. Yes, they cause an expansion. They're used to provide volume, but that's not the same as leavening. It's not chametz. So you can buy pasta. You can eat pasta. Okay. How about tortillas that you see in the store? Okay, you go to the store and you see those, what is it, mission tortillas or something like that? Well, here you have to be a little bit careful, and I'll tell you why. If you make your own tortillas at home, the way I described, you take flour, add water, throw in a couple of spices, maybe a little olive oil, knead it. Yeah, I would love to do that, Paul. I'm very into cooking. That's actually a great idea. One of these days. I'm so busy right now. So you take the dough, you knead it out, and you throw it into a pan and fry it like a tortilla in a pan without oil. That's fine. No problem whatsoever. That is unleavened. The thing is that usually the tortillas that I've seen that they sell in the store, at least in the United States, and I guess elsewhere as well, if they're wheat tortillas, if they're made out of wheat flour, they usually have a leavening agent added to them. So you have to be careful if you're buying something from the store. If you don't know exactly what ingredients are going into a food, or if you don't know if you're not good at reading ingredient lists, then when in doubt, leave it out. Okay, we'll talk about some of these ingredients that are leavening agents. Okay, but wheat tortillas that you buy in the supermarket generally have leavening agent added to them. Okay, how about corn tortillas that you buy in the supermarket? They generally do not have a leavening agent added to them. Usually, it's just two ingredients, which is ground corn and lime. That's it. Okay. So that's the key. If you want to know what foods are quote unquote kosher for Passover and what foods are not kosher for Passover, if you're going to buy them at the store, if you're going to buy prepared foods at the store, you need to know how to read ingredients. You need to know how to read ingredient lists, and when in doubt, leave it out. Okay. So if you see anything like yeast in it, and by the way, yeast can be added to a food not for leavening. It can be added for flavor, like nutritional yeast. But just to be safe, let's say if you see yeast in it, then leave it out. Okay. If you see baking powder, baking soda, then leave it out. Okay. So let's talk about that. Let's employ the help of our friend AI. Let's go to AI over here. Okay. What provide a list of common leavening agents found in grocery store foods in the United States. Let's see how good AI is. Okay, so there you go. So there's a list. Okay, so it didn't even, it does mention yeast. Okay, so baking soda or sodium bicarbonate, if you see that, then that's chances are. And by the way, these are not always being used as leavening agents, but usually if you see it, again, when in doubt, leave it out. Baking powder. Okay, yeast. And these are less common, but you will see them. Monocalcium phosphate, often found in self-rising flours and baking powders. It reacts very quickly once moistened. Sodium aluminum phosphate, frequently used in commercial cake mixes and refrigerated biscuits because it reacts slowly, and is stable at room temperature. Sodium acid phosphate, common in refrigerated canned doughs like croissants to control the timing of the rise. Ammonium bicarbonate, used primarily in small, thin, or crunchy commercial cookies and crackers. Okay, I think that kind of does it. I'm going to post this list in the comments. So these are your common leavening agents. Really, again, the most common three are baking soda, baking powder, and yeast. So those are the ones you really have to look out for, but you may want to keep an eye on these other ones as well. And let me post this here. So I posted it in the comments. Oh, it broke it up into various comments. Oh boy. Okay, anyway, you can look it up yourself. Okay, so if you see an ingredient that you don't know what it is and you think it might be being used as a leavening agent, then you should avoid it during Passover. But the three main ones again are going to be yeast, baking soda, which is sodium bicarbonate, and baking powder. Okay, if you see any of those three, then you're going to want to leave it out. Other than that, most of your things are pretty good to go, right? So if you buy, I don't know, I don't buy a lot of these products because I really make a lot of my own products and I'm very careful. But let's say you buy, I don't know, Campbell's soup, God forbid, at the store, right? If you look in the ingredients, you're not going to find anything. Chances are that's a leavening agent in it. I don't know. I don't know what Campbell's puts in their soups, but I'm speculating, right? If you buy, I don't know, what's an example? Rice. I don't know. I used to buy a lot of Amy's. What is it? Amy's Kitchen, is it called? Amy's, these organic prepared meals, which are delicious, right? So they used to have, like, for instance, Indian, which would be like rice and chickpeas, all of the stuff. This is not leavened bread. Basically, you just have to avoid leavened bread. If you look at the ingredients, I mean, it basically leaves everything open except those things which you might suspect are leavened bread, okay? It's going to be kind of obvious. So just be careful of your cookies, your cakes, all of this kind of stuff. Check the ingredients. Anything that is bread-like, again, giving the example of wheat tortillas, right? Anything at all that's bread-like, then, or cracker-like, then you should read the ingredients. And if you don't know every single ingredient that's in it, and you suspect there might be a leavening agent in it, then just don't buy it. Simple as that. Okay? You don't have to go crazy over it. If you want to be super sure, then just make more food at home during the holiday. But you can go to the store. Oh, here's another example of something I love making during Passover, which I never could have imagined growing up. Nachos and cheese. The nacho chips. That's not chametz. Now the rabbis would consider that chametz. Why would they consider it chametz? Because they, at least the Ashkenazim, they follow something called kitniot, or at least many Ashkenazim do, where anything that essentially anything that's a bean or a grain that in Middle Ages could have been confused with wheat, doesn't matter why, they were sold in similar looking sacks, that has now been declared as illegal on Passover. So when I was growing up, Passover was hell on earth. We could not have corn, we couldn't have rice, we couldn't have beans. Basically, Passover, for me growing up in Passover, the refrigerator was practically bare, and the only things we had were matzah, potatoes, eggs, and some disgusting things like gefilte fish out of a jar. And my dad would always make something called a matzah brie, which actually I kind of like, to be honest. But it got a little bit tedious, and that was about it. We would squeeze some orange juice. For some reason, we always had freshly squeezed orange juice on Passover, and that was it. It was like a week of basically eating potatoes, eggs, and matzah, and gefilte fish out of a bottle. It was disgusting. Okay, we weren't allowed to eat corn. So I remember, I'll tell you a story from when I was growing up. I remember I was playing across the street at my neighbor's house, Kathy, who was basically our best friend growing up. She lived across the street, not Jewish, as you can tell by the name, and Italian, and Kathy was short for Kathleen. So definitely not Jewish. And it was during Passover, and her mom gave me some popcorn to eat, and I started eating the popcorn, and then I realized about a couple minutes into the popcorn, oh my God, it's Passover. I'm not allowed to eat popcorn. I've now committed a horrible sin. And I felt so horrible. I felt so bad, because it had been drilled into my mind since a little kid that you're not allowed to eat these things on Passover. Of course, now I know that there's no problem with popcorn. Okay? Popcorn, anything made out of corn, anything made out of rice, anything made out of beans, it's all fine. The only thing that's forbidden is leavened bread. So let's talk about some borderline cases. Okay? What about boiled wheat groats? Okay, so what are wheat groats? So wheat groats are, or just let's talk about wheat grains. Let's say you take grains of wheat and you boil them in water like you would pasta. Okay, or wheat groats are kind of they're shelled and then they're split in half. They call them burgle or burgle. Okay, yeah, we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to fermented stuff in a second. Can you eat wheat groats? Absolutely. It's not fermented bread. It's not flour that's been milled and then that has water and leavening agent added to it and then been allowed to rise. Of course you can. So even if you take whole wheat grains of wheat and boil them, which is delicious, by the way, if you boil them long enough, it almost becomes like a pasta-like kind of experience. It's much healthier. Absolutely. How about beer? So a lot of people say that beer, because it is made from barley and it's fermented barley, and then yeast is added to that barley. Again, I'm not a huge beer drinker, so I don't remember the whole process, and I'm not going to look it up right now. But it's malted and it's fermented, so it's essentially, some people call beer liquid bread, right? That's what you've heard about. Some people call beer liquid bread. Is it forbidden on Passover? No, it's not bread. It's not leavened bread. Now, you might say, okay, it's a little bit too close for comfort, so just to play it safe, I won't drink beer because it's fermented barley, but it's not bread. It's not bread, okay? The whole idea of eating matzah is the opposite of matzah in the Torah is chametz. These actually are two opposites. They're contrasted with each other, and you can see that in a number of places. We'll see one if we go back in the text in a second, okay? So anything that is not leavened bread is okay to eat. Okay, how about, so bread is usually leavened using plants from the wheat family, okay? And the common ones are, let's ask AI again. Let's go to AI mode. What are the common plants in the wheat family? Right, so we're gonna get the usual ones probably, like spelt, rye. So let's read this a little bit. So these are called cereal grains. So the wheat family is formerly known as Poaceae, which encompasses, or Gramineae, which I believe is related to the word grain, which encompasses all of the true grasses. It is one of the most economically vital plant families on Earth, providing the majority of human dietary energy through cereal crops. Most plants commonly associated with wheat are other cereal grains grown for their edible seeds. Wheat includes common bread wheat, durum for pasta, and ancient varieties like spelt, emmer, and einkorn, which are these emmer and einkorn have become more popular in recent years. Okay, so this is really not. I'm going to rephrase this. Well, let's read through this and then I'll clarify a couple of things. So rice, a staple for half the world's population, typically grown in wet or flooded conditions. Maize, the highest produced cereal globally, used for food, livestock, and biofuel. Barley, closely related to wheat and rye, used in bread, beer, and animal feed. Oats, hearty cereal often used in breakfast foods and skincare products. Rye, close relative of barley and wheat, popular for bread making in Europe. Sorghum, a drought tolerant. Oh boy, this ask about things drive me nuts. Yeah. Sorghum, a drought-tolerant grain vital in Africa and Asia, and millet, a group of small seedless grasses, including pearl, proso, and foxtail millet. Okay, this is getting a bit off, so I'm going to re-ask the question. So what are common ingredients in the wheat family that contain gluten? Because really, it's the gluten which allows the dough to rise. So we've got wheat, barley, rye, etc. So, and these are, so many other common members of the same family do not contain, by the way, a family is a kind of a wide-ranging a taxonomic class. So do not contain problematic gluten proteins: rice, maize, sorghum, millet, teff, wild rice. So basically, with these, you really cannot leaven bread. So let's take example. Can you make leavened bread from rice flour? Oops. Hopefully you'll understand this flour. So we see here, it's not leavened bread, okay? And this is why I wanted to bring this up. Let's read through this. So this is rice flour, okay? Yes, you can make leavened bread from rice flour. So it's not really true. We're going to read ahead, okay? But because rice flour lacks the gluten necessary to trap gas and create structure, will not behave like traditional wheat dough. Instead of a kneadable dough, you will typically work with a stiff batter. So to achieve a rise, and notice they put the word rise in quotation marks. So it's not really leavening. It's not a rise. In rice-based bread, you must use specific ingredients or techniques to mimic the structural role of gluten. Okay? So you have to add all of these other binding agents. Okay? So binding agents. Most successful recipes require a binder like psyllium husk powder, xanthan gum, or gelatin to create an elastic network that can hold air bubbles. So in other words, what they're trying to say is, again, with the example of rice, the rice flour doesn't have any gluten. It won't be able to hold the air bubbles, okay, the carbon dioxide bubbles. They'll escape through the dough, and so the dough will never rise because it's the gluten, which is the protein. It's a protein in wheat and spelt and rye, etc., that traps the air bubbles inside, and so that's why it expands. It's like blowing up a million little balloons. Okay, starches, adding potato starch and or tapioca flour help improve the crumb's softness and prevents the bread from being too dense or gritty. Liquid and steam rice flour requires significant more hydration than wheat. Many bakers recommend placing a pan of water in the oven during the baking to create steam, which helps the bread rise and prevents the crust from becoming too hard. Blender method: soaking whole rice grains and then blending them with yeast and water to create a smooth, aerated batter that rises quickly. So compared to 100% wheat bread, 100% rice flour tends to be denser, chewier, prone to drying. The bottom basic line is, unless you go out of your way to modify the baking process, you cannot make leavened bread out of any of these flours. Okay, so you don't really have to worry about them. I'm not saying you should add leavening agent to them and start trying to make rice bread, but the reason I'm getting into this is because, so generally what happens is you have all of these. So the rabbis put out these cakes and even breads now. They even have kosher or Passover bread. I kid you not. Kosher for Passover rolls, kosher for Passover cakes, kosher for Passover cookies, which all mimic leavening, because the rabbis say that if you're not making bread out of one of, I believe it's 5 grains. Let me check on that. Let's go back to Rabbi AI. Okay, what grains do the rabbis say can be used to make leavened bread? So it's the 5 grains. And there they are. Wheat, barley, spelt, rye, oats. Okay. All from that same wheatgrass family. So the rabbis say that if you're not using one of these 5 grains, and in fact, let's read this. Okay. In Jewish law, meaning rabbinical law, halakha, the rabbis teach that only 5 specific species of grain are capable of leavening. Chametz are being used to make valid unleavened bread matzah. They're collectively known as the 5 grains, Chameshet Minei Dagan. And these are the 5 grains with their Hebrew names. Halachic significance. These 5 grains have a unique status in Jewish practice that distinguishes them from all other plants. So their leavening capability, the rabbis maintain that only these 5 grains ferment into true chametz. When mixed with water, other substances like rice or millet are said to undergo decay rather than true leavening, which is true. And I should point out that's talking about with adding a leavening agent. The hamotzi blessing, that's irrelevant. So to fulfill the biblical, really rabbinical commandment of eating matzah on Passover, the bread must be made from one of these 5 spices. The status of rice. While Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri famously argued in the Talmud that rice should be considered a grain capable of becoming chametz, his opinion was not accepted as the final law. Consequently, under standard Jewish law, rice flour bread is not considered true bread for ritual purposes, which is why many Sephardic communities eat rice on Passover, and we get the idea, okay? The point being, the main point that I wanted to make is that because the rabbis consider only those 5 grains, which they're correct, as capable of making true bread, what they will do is they will make substitute bread using these other grains. So for instance, they'll take rice flour or corn flour, is extremely common, and they'll make rolls out of them, which are leavened by using some of the processes that we saw earlier, right? They'll either make an additive, they'll add something that causes it to leaven, or they'll undergo one of the other techniques that we saw earlier. At any rate, they'll make cookies, cakes, bread out of these other grains, like rice or millet or corn, and they will sell it as kosher for Passover cakes, kosher for Passover rolls, and so on and so forth. And although it has not been leavened in the traditional way, I avoid them because I think it defeats the spirit of the holiday. And so in fact, the rabbis are much more interested in the hyper legalistic definition rather than the spirit. Okay, if the idea is to eat unleavened bread, and it's called Lechem-only, as we'll see if we get to it. Okay, if the idea is to eat unleavened bread, then to imitate something, even if you modified the process, and we'll read through that again, even if you modified the process by using a different grain and then modified the process to imitate the leavening in that grain, so you end up with a roll that's, let's say, made out of corn flour that actually mimics a leavened bread, I think that completely defeats. I don't think it completely defeats the spirit of the holiday. So the rabbis are very technical about it, and yes, technically they're correct. Only these grains and other related grains, such as emer and kamut, can be actually used to make true bread. But if you're gonna take another more distantly related grain and then modify the process to turn it into a bread or a roll or a cake, then you've done what the rabbis are so good at. You've made loopholes. So I see more and more as food production becomes more and more advanced. I've seen more and more kosher Passover. Even when I was growing up, there was kosher for Passover cakes, kosher for Passover cookies, and so on. But now there's really been a proliferation where they're so realistic that you would almost think you're eating real leavened bread or real leavened cake. That's how good they've gotten at it. And I think that completely defeats the spirit of the holiday. And I avoid anything in it, or I avoid anything like it. And by the way, they also use leavening agents, concentrating leavening agents in a lot of those recipes. So if you buy a kosher for Passover cake, you'll see something like corn flour and cornstarch, corn flour, and baking powder. So they're using the concentrated leavening agents, which is also one of the things that we're told to avoid, or it's called in Hebrew. Okay, so I avoid those things like the plague. All right, so if you see any kosher for Passover cakes, cookies, etc., I highly recommend that you completely avoid it. Okay, it sounds like a trick or a workaround. Okay, as Paul says. All right, so that kind of sums things up about what you're allowed to eat and what you're not allowed to eat on Passover. Again, I'll just give a quick summary. Okay, so things like pasta, totally okay. Popcorn, totally okay. Nacho chips, totally okay. Tortillas, if they're wheat tortillas, then usually leavening agent is added if you buy it from the store. If they're corn tortillas, usually leavening agent is not added. So beans are okay, rice is okay. All of that stuff is okay. We haven't spoken about fermented foods, but we'll get to that in a second. And I'll tell you why that's important. But all of those things are okay. What's not okay? Bread, cookies, cakes, anything that contains your typical wheat or related grains. Again, wheat, spelt, barley, rye, even oats and related grains such as, again, kamut, emer, etc. So these ancient grains, and a leavening agent that has been turned into a dough that's risen, that is chametz, and then anything that imitates it, so-called kosher for Passover cookies, kosher for Passover cakes, etc. That's what you want to avoid. Beer, I don't see technically a problem with it. If people feel it's too close for comfort, because again, the process is similar to making bread, right? It's often called liquid bread, then you can avoid it. But technically, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about leavened bread versus unleavened bread. Unleavened bread is permitted, leavened bread is forbidden, okay? Simple as that. And anything that tries to imitate leavened bread should also be forbidden, okay? We spoke about the different ingredients to look for if you're shopping and you're not sure, or you're not sure if something might be leavened bread or leavened dough, then look for those ingredients. You can look it up on the internet yourself, but you want to avoid anything that has a dough and a leavening agent, okay? Other than that, it's pretty simple. Any questions or comments? Anything? No? If not, then let's go on. So, thinking, should I take a break for 5 minutes? No, let's just go on. We'll go right ahead and continue. Okay, so let's talk about fermented foods. So why are fermented foods such an important issue? And are fermented foods permitted on Passover? The answer is yes. Absolutely 100%. Wine is permitted, cheese, sauerkraut, I don't know, what are some other common fermented foods? I don't know, I can't think of offhand. Fermented foods, all fermented foods, yogurt, kefir, all fermented foods are permitted on Passover. Passover does not restrict fermented foods, it restricts leavened bread, okay? And although there is a certain overlap between fermented foods and leavened bread, in the sense that leavening bread is a fermentation process. The bread is actually being fermented. The sugars are being consumed, and they're being turned into, I don't know, I have to look at the chemical process, but a slight amount of alcohol, lactic acid, I believe, carbon dioxide gas, etc. So it is a fermentation process, but it's not. But leavening is a subset of fermentation. Fermentation is a superset of leavening. Okay, so all fermentation. I'm sorry, all leavening. I shouldn't say all leavening, because if it's using a baking powder or baking soda, then that's not actually fermentation. But traditional leavening, using either sourdough starter or yeast, is a form of fermentation. So traditional leavening is a form of fermentation, but not all So all traditional leavening is fermentation, but not all fermentation is traditional leavening. So what's the problem with fermented foods, first of all? Okay, this problem comes from the Egyptian Karaites. And to look exactly what we're talking about, we're going to go back into the text. Let me close down some of these windows here. Leave that open. We'll leave that open. We'll close this down. Okay, so the problem comes from, let me find it now. Oops. Yeah. Comes from this word machmetzet. So, and we'll talk about it in a second. So, machmetzet. Okay, so let's define some Hebrew terms first. There's the word chametz. Let me find it here. That's chametz. Chametz, everybody agrees, is leavened bread. The Rabbinites, us, quote unquote, neo-Karaites, the traditional Egyptian Karaites, nobody argues the fact. They might argue the details over what is defined, but what defines it, but nobody argues the fact that chametz is leavened bread. Everybody agrees on that. The opposite of chametz, and we even see it here in opposition, is matzot, is unleavened bread. So chametz and matzot are opposites. And we could see this here, for instance, in verse 15. And I'll read the Hebrew and translate into the English. Shiv'at yamim matzot tochelu. For 7 days you shall eat only unleavened bread. Ach b'yom rishon tashpitu se'or mibatechem. And by the first day you shall have removed all concentrated leavening agent. And this is the third word we want to concentrate. Fourth word we want to concentrate on. Se'or. We'll talk about that. In fact, we're going to get into all four of these words now so that you can understand clearly what each of these four words mean. Okay. So for 7 days, let me just translate this verse. So we're in Exodus chapter 12, verse 15. For 7 days you shall eat only unleavened bread. But by the first day you must have removed concentrated leavening agent from your houses. Because anyone who eats leavened bread shall be excised, shall be excommunicated from Israel. So we have matzot is what you're supposed to eat, and the opposite of it, chametz, is what you're not supposed to eat. And they're in opposition to each other. 7 days you shall eat matzot. I'm going to skip this part, which is kind of ancillary. 7 days you shall eat matzot, because anyone who eats chametz shall be cut off from Israel. See how it's the verses in the Torah and the Tanakh are often, they're in parallel to each other, or I should say versets is the technical term. I like to call them verselets, as I always say. It sounds better. But verselets, I'm going to call them, are subverses, and many verses in the Tanakh are separated into, well, almost all are separated into two parts, into two verselets. And in many cases, the second part can be in parallel with the first part. And one of the types of parallelism, there are three types of parallelism, and I forget, they always have some specific academic name, but one is synonymous parallelism. Then there's antagonistic parallelism, I think they call it, and then there's complementary parallelism. I don't think those are the specific academic names, but it's the same idea. Okay, so a lot of times what you'll have is the two verselets are going to be in synonymous parallelism with each other, or they're going to be in oppositional parallelism. They're going to be opposites of each other, and so that we can use that form of parallelism to understand words more deeply. It would be like if I were to say to you, what's an example? You shall not go to school on. I'm sorry. Let's see. Let me think of a better example. You shall not go to a restaurant on Thursdays, but rather you shall only eat at home on that day. I'm just making it up, right? So we could see that that's those two subverses, those two verselets in my made-up verse are in opposition to each other. You shall not eat at a restaurant on Thursday, but rather you shall eat at home. And we can learn from that the opposite of a restaurant or eating at a restaurant is eating at home. And the opposite of eating at home is eating at a restaurant. That's exactly what we see here. In verse 15, we have these two versets that are in opposition. They're in oppositional parallelism to each other. So 7 days you shall eat matzot, shall eat unleavened bread, because anyone who eats leavened bread shall be cut off from Israel. And so we see that matzot and chametz, matzot meaning unleavened bread, and chametz are opposites of each other. This is what you eat for 7 days, and this is what you don't eat for those 7 days, lest you be cut off from Israel. So we learn that they're opposites, and there are many other verses where we see chametz and matzot in opposition to each other. Chametz and matzot are opposites. Okay? So if matzot is unleavened bread, and they're very simple, there's one difference in ingredients between matzot and chametz, and that is this thing right here, seor. This is the crux of the whole matter. This is the linchpin of the whole matter. If a dough has seor, and what is seor? Seor is the biblical Hebrew word for leavening agent. And in fact, it's related to the English word sour. And if you trace the etymology back, you can actually see that. I'm not just making it up, as so many people like to make up these etymologies. You can actually trace it back through the Romance languages, back to Latin, then pop it over to Greek, then back to Aramaic, and then back ultimately to Hebrew. Okay, so and that's where we get the word sourdough, right? Because that's originally what this meant. Seor is sourdough starter. That is the literal translation of the word seor. Okay, so the linchpin. So we have two opposites: matzot, unleavened bread. Chametz, leavened bread. The linchpin between them is, does the dough have seor in it or does it not? If it has seor in it, then it's chametz. If it doesn't have seor in it, then it's matzah. That's the only difference. Okay, so you get the idea. It's almost like if I were to illustrate it, we'd have a balance, right? We have two ends of a balance. Okay, and one side is chametz, unleavened bread, and the other side is leavened bread, and the other side is matzah, unleavened bread, and in the middle is seor. That's the linchpin. Okay, if it tilts to one side, if you add the seor, I guess the chametz was here. You have chametz. If you don't add the seor, then it tilts the other side, and that's the matzah. Okay, that's the way the structure works. So we know that the holiday, which we know is called Hag HaMazoth, the festival of unleavened bread, is the holiday when the type of bread we eat must be unleavened. What's the opposite of unleavened bread? Leavened bread. Okay? The opposite of unleavened bread is not sauerkraut. The opposite of unleavened bread is not cheese. The opposite of unleavened bread is not beer. The opposite of unleavened bread is not wine. The opposite of unleavened bread is not yogurt. Okay? The holiday has absolutely nothing to do with fermentation. It's true that traditional bread leavening is a form of fermentation, but it's a subset of fermentation. Okay? And we have a contrast here between unleavened bread, matzah, and leavened bread, chametz. The difference being whether seor, whether concentrated with sourdough starter is added or not. Okay? And this has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of fermented foods. Okay? So all fermented foods except for bread leavened in the traditional way, which is a fermentation process, are allowed. You can eat sauerkraut, you can eat yogurt, you can drink wine, you can eat cheese, and any other fermented food that you like, except for leavened bread, you're allowed to eat on Hag HaMazoth, because it does not say in the verse that we saw, okay, it doesn't say 7 days you shall eat matzot, but anyone who eats sauerkraut shall be cut off from Israel. It's not what it says. Anyone who eats leavened bread. Okay, I think I'm repeating myself. But that's okay. Torah repeats itself, and it's a good teaching technique to repeat yourself. So where does this problem come from? the traditional quote unquote Egyptian Karaites believe that you must refrain. So we have to understand the traditional Egyptian Karaites. I'm sorry to say they mean well, but they have strayed so far, in my opinion, in so many ways. They're coming back a little bit now because they realize the problem. But from true Torah, and they strayed in two ways. Number one, they took things to the extreme. So the classic example would be not allowing even electricity to be left on when the Sabbath comes in. So I remember many years ago when we used to have a weekly Torah study, Karaite Torah study at the Karaite synagogue in Jerusalem, which is the oldest synagogue, continuously in use synagogue, either in the world or in Israel, dating back to, I think, the 10th century or something like that. Definitely worth a visit. And I've had many nice discussions with many people there. But I remember going there. We would go in there on Thursday nights, and the refrigerator would be disgusting. Why would the refrigerator be disgusting? Because what they used to do is they would turn off the refrigerator before Shabbat came in, and they would pack the freezer with ice packs to keep the food cold over Shabbat, because they believed that not only, and I don't think it had anything to do with fire per se, they believed that not only should you not do work on Shabbat, but no work shall be done for you on Shabbat. So even a refrigerator, which is doing work for you by keeping the food cold, must be turned off on Shabbat. So by the time we got there the following Thursday, if they hadn't cleaned up the mess, which they generally hadn't, the refrigerator stank. It was filled with water, which had like dripped down from the melting ice packs in the freezer, things that already started to get rotten, etc. So this is an example of the Egyptian Karaites and how they've taken on, probably because they thought they were, it's almost like the Christians, you refrain, you become ascetic. It's your way of being pious, of being like super pious, to prove how dedicated you are to God, and that you want to repent and all of these kinds of things. But we don't add from the Torah and we don't take away from the Torah, right? So that's one example. Okay, that's one example. But and in other ways, the traditional Egyptian Karaites became so extreme that they moved more and more away from what I would call balanced Karaism. On the other hand, starting especially in the Middle Ages and 1500s or so, they became more and more influenced by rabbinical Judaism. So they started taking on more and more traditional rabbinical customs. So many of them, so first of all, they call their chief leader not Hakham, they call him a rabbi. They wear yarmulkes, kippot on their head, many of them, or some of them, the more religious ones. They will say traditional rabbinical style prayers before they eat, let's say, a fruit. So if you eat a fruit, if you're an Orthodox Jew and you eat a fruit, you say a little, a canned blessing, a scripted blessing. And you'll see the more religious Egyptian Karaites do that. So on the one hand, over the years, and this is actually predating, this is already dating back for a while, the Karaites became more and more extreme, more and more ascetic, and more crazy, I guess, in their attempt to, to interpret the commandments of the Torah. And on the other hand, they became more rabbinized. So a lot of people who become very interested in Karaism, and I know some of the people who are listening to this lecture can be included in this group. They find their way away from rabbinical Judaism, and they're really gung ho. They find out about the Karaites, and they get in contact with, let's say, KJA, the Karaite Jews of America, and they're really excited and gung ho, and quickly they become disappointed. They're like, no, something seems a bit off here. Okay, and indeed it is off. And don't get me wrong, this is not a personal attack against them. This is a completely a professional attack against them. Okay, something's off. It doesn't seem right. And there are many other examples of such things. And it's really because they've wandered away from the balance of the Torah by either getting too extreme in their interpretation of the laws, or by getting too rabbinical in their interpretation of the laws. Okay, that's usually when they find their way over to us or to other similar groups, and we like to keep the balance. So, right. Did they observe the one-day Seder? I thought they were moving. I haven't been in contact with them. I thought they were moving more and more towards keeping the biblical calendar. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I know for a while they basically kept the rabbinical calendar. Anywho, so if you get in contact, if you get really excited about Karaism and then you contact the Egyptian Karaites, again, if you're English speaking, it's mostly probably going to be the KJA. You don't be disappointed if you're disappointed, which you might very well be. Okay, enough about them. The point being that how does this relate to fermented foods? Because the Egyptian Karaites, let me just turn on the light here. The Egyptian Karaites say that not only must you refrain from chametz, from leavened bread on Passover, but you must refrain from all fermented foods. And where do they get that from? Excuse me for 1 second. I'm just going to go grab some water and I'll be right back. Back in 2 minutes. Paul, can you? I'm back. Paul, can you forward me that calendar? I'm curious to see it. Thank you for letting me know. I thought I was under the impression that they had moved recently more and more to, in recent years, more and more to the biblical calendar. I'm actually, with the correct Friday start time, you're saying. Israeli Karaites. Oh, the KJA, you're saying, did Wednesday. But the Israeli Egyptian Karaites, yeah, that's the one I saw. I saw the one with the Friday start time with the Israeli one. Okay, interesting. I didn't know the KJA did Wednesday. Okay, so really, that's kind of interesting because even within the Egyptian Karaite community, I thought they would be kind of achid, like kind of one and the same. Okay, anyway, neither here nor there. But so where do we get this idea of refraining from fermented foods? So we've spoken about 3 words. Let's review. In fact, I'm going to put this on a, let's see, can we do it this way? I think it's not going to be the trouble that it's worth. Yeah, I won't do it. Because by the time I set it up, and now we'll do it. Let's do it, because I can always grab it. 1 second here. So let's talk about our 3 important words. Matzot equals matzot equals unleavened bread. Okay. Then we have chametz. Chametz. Where's our chametz? I should really find matzah, but close enough. It doesn't matter. So chametz equals chametz, and you'll see what I'm doing in just a second, equals leavened bread. And then seor Saor equals saor equals sour dough starter. In fact, we see the word sour in the word saor. So I'll just point that out. And then we have one last word that's relevant to all of this discussion, and it's machmetzet. So let me grab that. Machmetzet equals so that's the big question. And let me publish this as a comment. I wish they would be able to format it more, but okay, it's going to have to do. Let me actually modify it. Can I grab that? Oh boy. Can I edit that? Oh shoot. What did I do here? So I can't even. Oh, I should have done this differently. Okay, hold on a second. So I can't even grab it as a copy and paste it. Can I? I guess not. Delete comments and user and delete their comments. I can ban myself. I guess again. So that'll have to do. Okay. At any rate, so the thing that we're going to talk about now. I'm going to take this off the screen because it's actually just getting in the way. Okay. So the thing we're going to talk about is this last word, machmetzet. Maybe I'll do it a little bit better afterwards. And the Egyptian Karaites say that this word machmetzet means fermented foods. So let's see where this word appears. It appears, at least in Exodus chapter 12, in two different places. We're going to start in verse 19. Okay, so we're in Exodus chapter 12, verse 19. Shiv'at yamim tzor lo yematzeh bebatechem. So for 7 days, sourdough starter, concentrated leavening agent, must not be found in your houses. Ki kol ochel machmetzet v'nichrata nefesh hahi me'adat Yisrael. Because anyone who eats machmetzet, and here's the word right here, machmetzet, anybody who eats machmetzet, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Whether bager be'ezrach, whether you're a convert, quote unquote convert, or a native born. Okay, so the Karaites say, the Egyptian Karaites say that this word machmetzet means all fermented foods, sauerkraut, yogurt, cheese, wine, and so on. So let's read it. And I say that that's not what it means at all. Machmetzet is just another word for chametz, because the Torah often does things like this. So for instance, in Exodus 23, we saw that melacha and melechet avodah are related. It's two different ways that might have slight nuances and difference. Maybe that's not the best example, but words that are presented slightly differently still mean the same thing. They're just giving another perhaps aspect, or maybe they fit in better with the oral flow, with the flow of reading it out loud. At any rate, so the Karaites say that the traditional Egyptian Karaites say that this word machmetzet means fermented foods, sauerkraut. So I'm going to, instead of just saying fermented foods, I'm going to substitute it with the word sauerkraut, just to illustrate the point. Okay? And let's see if it makes sense. Verse 19. For 7 days, no sourdough starter shall be found in your houses, because anybody who eats sauerkraut, or let me say it different because we're repeating the word sour. So for 7 days, no yeast, concentrated yeast, shall be found in your house, because anybody who eats sauerkraut, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel. Does that make any sense? Of course not. Okay? And it'll even make less sense when we get to verse 20. Now, of course, what I say and what it's clear is this word machmetzet means leavened bread. It's just another word for chametz. You can even see it's related. Machmetzet and chametz. It even sounds the same. Okay, so here's chametz. And here's machmetzet. It's just chametz with an extra letter added at the beginning and an extra letter added at the end. If we look at the again, some of the scholarly biblical dictionaries for machmetzet, then we see they say it means chametz. It's the same as chametz. In fact, it goes to chametz. They don't even give it a separate entry. So if I click on machmetzet here, it takes me right to chametz. Okay. And let's see if it even says machmetzet. So here, machmetzet, which only appears twice in the entire Tanakh, Exodus chapter 12, 19, and 20. That's the verses we're looking at right here. Okay. So even this very respected BDB dictionary doesn't translate as fermented foods. It doesn't translate as anything fermented. It translates it as anything leavened. Leavened. Okay. Let's even say if they say anything here about machmetzet. And they don't really. Okay. 18. So on. Okay. So machmetzet is just a similar synonym for chametz. And if it weren't, it wouldn't have the same entry here in the dictionary, right? And it's just it's a synonym for chametz. Okay. So now let's read it with that meaning. Again, let's go back and read these two verses. First, I'm going to do it with the Egyptian Karaite meaning, verses 19 and 20. For 7 days, concentrated yeast shall not be found in your houses. Let's say concentrated yeast shall not be found in your houses, because anyone who eats sauerkraut shall be cut off from the community of Israel. Let's skip ahead to 20. You shall not eat sauerkraut in any of your habitations, in any of your cities, your habitations. I'll just go with cities. In any of your habitations, where they usually translate it, shall not eat sauerkraut in any of your cities. You shall eat rather matzot. You shall eat rather unleavened bread. Does that make any sense? Of course not. Machmetzet, in both of these verses, we spoke about oppositional parallelism, right? Antagonistic parallelism, where the two verselets are in opposition to each other, the opposite of each other. That's clearly what we have here, both in verses 19 and 19 and 20. So now let's read it the way it should correctly be understood, which is just that machmetzet is the same as chametz. And we'll see it makes perfect sense. So Exodus 12, verse 19. Let's go up to here. For 7 days, no sourdough starter shall be found in your house, because anybody who eats leavened bread shall be cut off from Israel. Doesn't that make sense? Of course it makes sense. If Seor is sourdough starter, which it is, then no sourdough starter shall be found in your house, because anyone who eats leavened bread shall be cut off from Israel. Okay, verse 20. Don't eat any leavened bread in your cities, rather eat unleavened bread, matzot. It's clear, right? Again, the Egyptian Karaite translation of this verse would be, don't eat sauerkraut. And again, I'm just using sauerkraut as a stand for all fermented foods, cheese, wine, sauerkraut, whatever you want. Let's use cheese this time. Don't eat cheese in any of your cities, but eat matzot, but eat unleavened bread. Does that make sense? Or does don't eat leavened bread in any of your cities, but eat unleavened bread? Of course, the second one makes sense. Okay? And so therefore, but the Karaites, the traditional Egyptian Karaites, say that the word machmetzet means any fermented food, because they base themselves on the word beginning with a mem. We won't get into the details. That which makes something fermented, but it really means that which makes something leavened. In other words, leavened bread, or that which is the result of making something leavened. In other words, leavened bread. Okay, so but the Egyptian Karaites translate this word as any fermented food, and so therefore they forbid all fermented foods. Again, sauerkraut, yogurt, wine, certainly beer, whiskey, and so on and so forth. Anything that's a fermented food. Kimchi. What other fermented foods are there? You get the idea. Yogurt, I mentioned, kefir, and so on and so forth. Okay? And that's why I bring up the issue of fermented foods. So can you eat fermented foods on Hag HaMazoth? Absolutely. It's Hag HaMazoth. It's the festival of unleavened bread. It's not the festival of unfermented foods. If the Torah had said, when you were going out of Egypt, you didn't have time to make sauerkraut and yogurt and cheese and wine, and therefore, when you went out into the desert, you ate raw cabbage and grape juice and milk and whatever. Therefore, then you might have a case to say that this is an issue of fermented foods versus unfermented foods, but it's not. 1 second. Water. But it's not, right? This is not the festival of unfermented foods. This is the festival of unleavened bread. Okay, I think I made the point probably too many times. Okay, thank you. Right. Great. I love it. Thank you, Paul, and vinegar. Thank you. Another good one. Great. There is a mention of fermented wine in the Torah. You're right. Called chometz. Okay. But I don't think we need to look that up right now. It's not relevant. Okay. All right. So I hope that answers that question. Okay. All right. Let's talk about some other things. Do you have to have a Passover Seder? Well, I'm reading now a 500-page doctoral thesis by a person who speaks about how the rabbis were influenced heavily by the Greeks. And one of the things he points out is the Passover Seder is based on the Greek symposium. Symposium was kind of a structured get-together for Greeks. I don't remember. I haven't gotten to all the details yet, but I've just gotten through part of it so far. At any rate, so there's no need to have a structured Passover Seder. I actually attended, as I said, a rabbinical structured Passover Seder last night because I grew up as a rabbinical Jew, conservative Jew in the suburbs of New York, and that's part of my childhood memories, and I like it, and I'm very nostalgic towards it. So I did go to a Passover Seder last night. It was a lot of fun, but then I went home and ate leavened bread because Passover doesn't really start, or Hag HaMazoth doesn't really start until tomorrow night, right? However, there is a commandment, explicit commandment. Let's find it. In chapter 13, if I'm mistaken. Yeah. No. Where is it? Yeah. It's chapter 13, verse 8. So let's read through some of these verses in English, starting in verse 3. So the focus here is really the firstborn, because this is the plague of the firstborn, or this is right after the plague of the firstborn, right? So we'll start in verse 3. I'm just going to read in the English. We'll switch over to Hebrew if we need to. So then Moses said to the people, commemorate this day, the day you came out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, because Yahweh brought you out of it with a mighty hand. Eat nothing containing yeast. Let's look at that again in the Hebrew. Okay, with lo yachel chametz, do not eat any leavened bread is really what it says. It doesn't say eat nothing containing yeast. It says v'lo yachel chametz, and leavened bread is not to be eaten. Today in the month of the Aviv, you are leaving, right? We saw the importance of that, the month of the almost ripe barley. When Yahweh brings you into the land of the Canaanites and blah, 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 those people, the land he swore to your ancestors to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey. You are to observe the ceremony in this month. What ceremony? For 7 days, eat bread made without yeast, and on the seventh day, hold the festival to the Lord. Let's look at that in the Hebrew, verse 6. Shivat yamim tochal matzot. So for 7 days, you shall eat only unleavened bread. eat leavened bread during these 7 days, and then it's reiterated in verse 7. Matzot ye'achel et shivat yamim. So for 7 days, only unleavened bread. Or if you're good, in other words, what does it mean only unleavened bread? If you're going to eat bread, it must be unleavened. You don't have to. So that's another question. The rabbis say, especially on the first night, that you must eat unleavened bread. Okay. I think that's very nice and very traditional, but you don't have to eat. It's not a commandment to eat unleavened bread. The commandment is if you eat bread during these 7 days, it must be unleavened. There is a commandment to, in the original Passover, and is it in subsequent Passovers? It doesn't matter now. I believe in subsequent Passovers, but there's some differences between the laws in subsequent and the original Passover. But let's say in subsequent Passovers, that when you eat the Passover offering, the Pesach, the slaughtered lamb, then it must be with unleavened bread. But we don't bring the Passover offering. And so therefore, that's another important question. So the rabbis say you must eat a certain amount, especially on the first day, and you'll see them sometimes stuffing their faces to make sure that they get the right amount of matzah. And some of the matzah is pretty disgusting. The store-bought matzah. Actually, when I was at the Passover Seder last night, the matzah was really good. I usually don't like this matzah, but it was whole wheat and it was made, I guess, by hand or something like that. It was very good, actually. But at any rate, you don't have to eat matzot every day during Passover or even on the first day. It just means that if you eat bread, it must be unleavened bread. It cannot be chametz. It must be matzot. Okay? All right. V'lo yera'eh lecha chametz, v'lo yera'eh lecha sa'or b'gvulecha. So chametz, and meaning leavened bread, and sa'or, meaning sourdough starter, concentrated leavening agent, must not be seen anywhere in your borders. And then we get to verse 8. And you shall say to your son on this day. And what day are we speaking about? We're speaking about this day is implying the day on which we exited Egypt, which is the 15th of the first month, which is the first day of Passover. Right? That's the context here, the 7-day holiday of Passover. Lemor. And let me just modify that for 1 second. Okay. We'll leave it at that for now. So you shall tell your son on that day, meaning the first day of the 7-day festival, Ba'avod zeh asa Yahweh li b'tzeiti. Ba'avod zeh asa Yahweh li b'tzeiti Mitzrayim. This is why I do this, because of what Yahweh did for me when I went out of Egypt. Okay? In other words, what the commandment is really telling us is that on these days when you're eating matzah and not chametz, your child is going to notice it. It's a teaching experience. It's a 3-dimensional teaching experience, right? Many of the commandments are 3-dimensional teaching experiences. They're learning opportunities, teaching opportunities. What do they call them? They're teaching moments. So your child, your little child, your small child is going to notice, hey, Abba, Dad, why are we not eating regular bread this week? And you're going to say to him, the reason we're not eating regular bread is because of what Yahweh did for us in taking us out of Egypt. And then you're going to be able to tell him the whole story about how we sacrificed a Passover lamb, a Paschal offering, a Passover offering, and we ate it with unleavened bread. We didn't have time to add yeast to the bread. So when we got out into the desert, when we baked the bread, it was unleavened bread. And it's basically a teaching tool, right? To explain to your children to pass on to the next generation the story of the Exodus. Okay? And that's what it's saying here. So it's not saying that you have to have a structured Seder. It's really saying that by your son or by your children, seeing that they're only eating, that the entire family is only eating unleavened bread for a week, even a small child's gonna be like, hey, what's the story? Why can't we go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac? No, Big Mac is at McDonald's, right? Why do we have to eat? What is this stuff we're eating? It's almost like the rabbinical 4 questions, but it's only one of the 4 questions. The rest are kind of made up, right? But at any rate, this is going to be the teaching tool. This is the teaching tool for letting even small children realize something is different this week. And that's going to be the entry point for you to explain to your children the story of the Exodus, what Yahweh did for our ancestors when he fulfilled his promise that he made originally to Abraham in Genesis chapter 15, which was now fulfilled 400 plus years later in the Exodus from Egypt, which is really the essence of the Passover story, not the Exodus itself, but the fulfillment of the promise. Okay? So, do we need to do a Passover Seder? As I said, the Passover Seder is really based on the Greek Symposium, according to this wonderful doctoral thesis that I'm reading. And let's learn for a second about the Greek Symposium. We've been going for over 3 hours, so I'm going to start wrapping up soon. Okay, what was a Greek Symposium? We're going to ask the only rabbi we can trust, and that's Rabbi AI. So a Greek Symposium was a formal male-only aristocratic drinking party in ancient Greece focused on wine consumption. And notice, of course, what is the focus of the rabbinical Seder? If you've ever done or been to a rabbinical Seder, it's the 4 cups of wine. Right? They say it's a mitzvah. They say it's a commandment. They even actually say at the end of the Haggadah, at the end of the structure, the book that structures the Passover Seder, that it's been done according to its laws and according to its chilkotav. I think it says ilchotav v'chukotav. It's according to its laws and its statutes, right? So they're actually saying it's a commandment. The rabbi's saying you are commanded to drink 4 glasses of wine during the Passover Seder. And there are a whole bunch of other things that you're commanded to do, such as lean on your side. I remember, I'll tell you, this is how ridiculous rabbinical Judaism can get. So I remember many years ago when I was living in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim, I went with my ex-wife. We went to a Passover Seder. It was a big mistake. And no, not the marriage. That also was a big mistake, but the Passover Seder. And the head of the Passover Seder, the father of the house, he had read that when you drink the wine, you have to lean to your side, which I saw this is common, even last night, that people lean to their side a little bit while they were drinking the wine. But he had read somewhere that to really, in order to fulfill the mitzvah of leaning to your side while you're drinking the wine, this is so ridiculous, that you must lean at greater than a 45-degree angle. Because if you're less than a 45-degree angle, you're not leaning, right? You're still more straight up than you are lean. But if you're more than a 45-degree angle, okay, like this, now you're technically leaning, right? So I remember watching this person drink the 4 glasses of wine, leaned over at like a 50-degree angle, okay, leaning to the left at a 50-degree angle, and his wife was trying to pour the wine into his mouth. And if you don't understand what I'm saying, try doing this. Lean over like, oh my God. I'm gonna have to turn off the phone. This is driving me crazy. Hold on a second. Lean over on your side to like a 50-degree angle. I'm not talking about back. I'm talking about your side. And then try drinking a glass of wine, and you'll realize that most of it ends up all over your clothes and on the chair and on the floor. It was the most ridiculous thing. Anyway, that's how ridiculous rabbinical Judaism can get. That's how ridiculous it is. That's how ridiculous, I guess, it's always been. And so the rabbis say that you have to lean, right? And they have a whole bunch of other laws as well. Okay, so what do you really have? Oh, we were talking about the Greek Symposium. Okay, so held in andron, men's room, like android, or like of a home, participants reclined on couches. Notice the reclining, right? That's another aspect. So we already have 2 aspects of the Passover Seder: wine consumption and reclining, right? The rabbis say, in fact, one of the 4 questions is, why do we lean while we do the Passover Seder? So they recline on couches. Reclined on couches, wore garlands, and debated philosophy or politics while consuming mixed wine and enjoying music, poetry, or games. Okay? Doesn't that sound kind of like, to a certain degree, Doesn't this sound like to a certain? Hold on, let me just make sure something's not open. Doesn't this sound like to a certain degree a rabbinical Passover Seder? Okay, so key aspects of the symposium. We can skip this part. Usually occurred after a meal and was overseen by a symposiarch or master of ceremonies, kind of like the Passover Seder, who decided the wine to water ratio. Activities included intellectual debates, as in Plato's symposium, poetry, recitals, music by hired performers, and the game of whatever, flicking wine dregs to the target. Oh, that sounds kind of fun, actually. Guests reclined on 7 to 15 couches, kilmai in a designated room, often decorated with art, and enjoyed the service of enslaved people. Atmosphere, while a place for high-level discussion, was also a venue for drinking, revelry, and sexual entertainment. So it got pretty wild, right? So the rabbinical Passover Seder, according to this person, who I don't know if he wants me to mention his name, but according to his PhD thesis, and it seems clear from even reading this, is based on the Greek Symposium. Is great based on the Greek Symposium. So no, you don't have to carry out a Passover Seder. Certainly not in the rabbinical style. Okay, but there's nothing wrong with it as long if you want to get a bunch of people together on the first night of Passover and tell the story of the Exodus. That's what we're going to be doing here in the Golan Heights, in the city where I live, tomorrow night. We're going to have our Karaite Passover Seder, and it's not going to have any of the elements of having to drink wine or recline or anything like that. It's just going to be a gathering where we get together and tell the Passover story. We go through the verses in the Tanakh, not all of them that are, but many of them that are, because it's too long, that are related to the Passover story. I published a Haggadah. It's probably too late to order it right now. I don't think they can get it to you in. Okay, we'll get to that in 1 second. So okay, so let me answer this question right now. So Misha says, if the first day of the month is the 20th, should not the first evening on the 14th evening be on the 2nd of April? So the first month started on the evening of Friday the 20th, which means that the 15th day of the month, which is when Hag HaMazoth starts, is going to be on Friday, the evening of April 3rd. Okay? If you look at the calendar that I put up, and I can put it up again while we're talking, then you'll see exactly what's going on. Okay? Where'd it go? Did I close it? Oh, I closed it. I'll open it up. 1 second, please. Okay, you should be able to see it now, and that should kind of answer the question. Okay? So, right. So we're getting together tomorrow. I published a that I've been working on. I've been improving it or working on for years now, for like 15 years. Karaite Haggadah, which contains only verses from the Tanakh and tells the story and has beautiful pictures of Israel. I'll put up the link, even though it's probably way too late to order now. But if you want to order one for next year, you're more than welcome to. But let me put up the link. You can at least go look at it. And I guess this is the best way to do it. Oops, 1 second, please. So this is Karaite. So what is the Haggadah? The Haggadah is the little book that structures the Seder, right? So there's the link to it. If you want to go check it out, you're more than welcome to. So yes, we are doing a Passover Seder tomorrow night. It's not going to involve drinking. I mean, we might have wine at the table, but it's not going to involve forced drinking. It's not going to involve any of the. I mean, one of the things you notice about the rabbinical Passover Seder is there's such a little focus on the Passover story itself. It tells about all of these midrashim that various rabbis made, and Rabbi Akiva shows that the plagues at the Dead Sea were 250, and he outdoes whatever Rabbi Yossi that said it was only 200 or whatever. All kinds of shuli, all kinds of what would be the word in English? All kinds of ancillary or things that are not related really to the story of the Exodus. So you end up talking about the 4 sons, the wise son and the son that cannot ask, and all kinds of other things. It's just a whole bunch of fluff in there, which obscures the actual main point of the Seder, which is to talk about the Exodus from Egypt, or to talk about the entire Passover story, which really starts in Genesis 15, when Abraham is promised that his descendants will eventually be redeemed from Egypt. So do you have to do a Passover Seder? No, you don't have to. The whole idea is that by eating matzot, by eating unleavened bread during the week of quote-unquote Passover, of Hag HaMazoth, that this is a learning opportunity, this is a teaching opportunity for you for even young children to realize something is different, and to use that as a springboard to tell them, to pass on to the next generation, this foundational story, the story that is the foundation of the nation of Israel, or the culmination of Yahweh's promise to Abraham 430 years earlier. Okay. Do you have to do so? As long as we're on this topic, and I'll finish up within 10 minutes. Do you have to do a search for chametz on the night before Passover? So that's traditional. I actually loved it. I mean, a lot of these traditions I love, I have to say. And but when we were kids, the night before Passover, so if Passover started, let's say, on a Wednesday night, we would do it on a Tuesday night. We would turn off all the lights. My dad would hide little pieces of bread all around the house, and then we'd go around with a candle searching for the pieces of bread, which we knew where they all were. It was just kind of a show. And we'd gather them all together and then say a certain prayer. And then the next morning we would burn any of the all of that bread that we gathered, and perhaps any other bread that might still be in the house. It's called biur chametz. So do you have to do any of that? No, you don't have to do some search. You don't have to do any kind of official search for chametz the night before. You don't have to burn the chametz, right? It should just not be seen anywhere. It can be thrown in the garbage. I even say that if you just really, I think it's better to actually just throw it out. But if you just are that type of person where you just cannot waste things, then I would even say that as long as you put it in a hiding place, like put it in a bag in the back of your refrigerator or in the back of your freezer, then I believe it starts in the evening, Misha. Then that would be acceptable. So if you have trouble throwing things out, certainly let's say you have a large amount of food, that it's a waste of money to throw, all that stuff out, then put it in a place where it can't be seen, away, out of sight, out of mind kind of thing. So I would say that it's best to discard of it. But if you just can't bring yourself to do it, let's say you have some loaf of bread, you just can't throw stuff out. If you really just can't do it, then hide it somewhere, put it in a place where it can't be seen, right? I think that's the second best thing to do. So no, you don't have to have a formal Passover Seder. No, you don't have to do a formal search for chametz. No, you don't have to burn the chametz in the morning. What else? Passover dishes. Do you need special Passover dishes? Don't make me laugh. Of course you don't need special Passover dishes. Why would you need special Passover dishes? Because the rabbis say that even if a speck of chametz has somehow or another penetrated its way into a dish, that renders the dish unkosher for Passover, right? That's ridiculous. That's insanity, okay? You do not need, without getting into all the details, no, you absolutely do not need to change the dishes at all. You can use your same dishes that you use during the regular year. Do you need to clean your house? No, you don't need to clean your house at all. Again, it's an excuse, and actually many Orthodox Jews will say that it's an excuse. Why do they do such a thorough cleaning of their house? Because it's a spring cleaning. The spring cleaning is a great idea. And if you want to use Passover as an opportunity to do a spring cleaning, go for it. But you don't have to clean your house. You just have to make sure that that you've gotten rid, one way or another, or put out of sight all of the chametz and all of this, or all of the leavened bread and all of the leavening agents. What happens if you find a piece of chametz? So it's the middle of Passover, and right, this is why the rabbis say you have to do a thorough cleaning of your house, why you have to change the dishes, why you have to do the search. What happens if you find, I don't know, you're walking around, it's the third day of Passover, and boom, you look behind your couch and there's a peanut butter and jelly sandwich left over from 2 weeks ago. Okay, take it and throw it in the garbage. No big deal. We don't need perfection. Yahweh doesn't want perfection. This is not, as I always say, this is not an all or nothing test. You don't either get a 0 in life or 100 in life. You do the best you can. You do reasonable amounts. You try to do the best you can, right? So yes, you're going to try to get rid of all your chametz from your house, all your sa'or from your house. If you really can't bring yourself to get rid of it, then you're going to hide it somewhere. It's out of sight, out of mind. And if you happen to find a piece of chametz, which by the way happens to rabbinites all the time, then just throw it in the garbage. No big deal. Okay, you haven't committed any horrible sin. Don't eat it. Really, that's the main commandment, right? Is to not eat it. It's not consume it. That's why it's not to be found in your house, so you don't eat it. Not because the presence of it there is in itself, I mean, preferable than not be there, but it's not the presence itself, it's the eating of the chametz. What else? I don't know. Maybe that covers everything. Any questions that you guys have? Do you guys want to ask any specific questions? More about loving God than burning people with extreme rules to show devotion. Exactly. Have I left anything out? I'm trying to think. Kitniot, we already spoke about. So kitniot is a rabbinical idea, the Ashkenazi rabbinical idea that you're not allowed to eat things that might have in the Middle Ages been confused with grains. So again, beans, corn, rice, chickpeas. Yes, of course, you can eat all of that stuff. Even wheat you can eat. You can even take wheat and boil it and eat it. Pasta you can eat. Sell your chametz. No, of course not. That's ridiculous. That's just a loophole, right? That's just almost embarrassing. It's what the rabbis love to do, is do these little ceremonial, legalistic loophole kind of thingies. So now, if you sell the chametz, so what is Paul talking about? So, and I remember we used to do this in my house as well, right? The Jewish community used to do it. So you take all your chametz. So the rabbis understand you don't want to throw out your chametz. So we used to have all this stuff we would call chametz, cornflakes and cereals and God knows what, I don't know, cookies and who knows. So we don't want to throw all that stuff out, especially my dad, who didn't like to throw things out. Let's put it that way. Shosho, don't do that, sir. Who didn't like to throw things out at all, like ever. He would, hold on. Shoshi boy, what are you doing? So, but all Jews did this. You didn't throw out your chametz. You took it and you packed it away in boxes and put it in the basement or in the attic or something like that. We would put it in the basement, and then you go to the local Jewish community and, hey, Shoham, excuse me for 1 second. Shosha, what are you doing? Come, I'm going to let you out. Too much energy. Go. You would take it to the local Jewish community and you would sign a form, basically signing away your chametz, saying you don't own it. And then I think all the forms would be gathered together, and then the chametz would be sold to a non-Jew. I know in Israel they have, I think, some Arab who's been filling this role for God knows how long. I don't know if they switched over recently, but it's all sold to him. All of the chametz of all of the Jews in Israel who signed that form, it's sold to him. But there's a stipulation in the form, if I'm not mistaken, which says that it's only for 7 days and it's automatically given back after 7 days. Basically, it's all this legalistic loophole, legalistic hoops that you're jumping through. The idea being that you're not supposed to be in possession of chametz or of chametz during Passover. So you're not technically not in possession of it because you've sold it, quote unquote. You symbolically sold it to a non-Jew. So even though it's in your house, in your basement, 5 boxes full of of chametz, it's not yours because you signed this form and sold it. And every year, this goes on in all of the Jewish communities. I don't know about all, but many of the Jewish communities around the world and in Israel, that it's a big thing. Sell your chametz and whatever. It's nonsense. Obviously, that's just casuistry, right? That's just legal gymnastics. It's not. It has nothing to do with reality. So no, of course you don't have to sell your chametz. It's insanity. Anything else? I mean, it's better if you cannot get rid of your chametz, then just put it away somewhere. But please don't go through the empty, the legalistic hoop. Don't jump through this empty legalistic hoop of selling your chametz as if now it's not yours. It's just ridiculous. Okay, anything else? Going once, going twice. Any other questions? I think we kind of covered everything. I really do. We've been going at it for 3.5 hours with no breaks. So I think we've pretty much covered everything that I can think of. I'll leave it open for another minute to see if anybody wants to ask any other questions. And if not, then I guess we'll end it here. So thank you all for joining this Passover class. Hope it provided a lot of insight. Hope it clarified a lot of things. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it was long, but I wanted to cover everything thoroughly. So I think we got a general idea of what we're supposed to do on this holiday and what we're not supposed to do on this holiday. So let's get rid of that comment. Where'd it go? So yeah, that's about it. Unless you guys have any other questions, then we're going to close out the class. Tomorrow night is the first day of Passover, and it ends the following Friday night at sunset. So hope you guys have a great Passover. We'll do our regular Torah study, the Shabbat. So I'll send out an announcement about that, of course, as well. And that's about it. That's all I have to say for this Passover class. Thanks for joining us. I wish you all a Hag HaMazoth Sameach, a happy festival of unleavened bread. And we'll see you again soon. I used to do the Passover Seder online, but it just became too burdensome, so I don't do that anymore. It's too difficult to coordinate with all the different time zones, and people want to eat in the middle and so on and so forth. So I don't do that anymore, but we are doing a World Alliance of Qara'im Passover Seder right here in Israel, in the Golan Heights. And I guess on Shabbat, I'll let you guys know how it went. All right, then. So thanks for joining us. Once again, this is Melech, Rahmiel ben Yaakov of the World Alliance of Qara'im, wishing you a Hag HaMazoth Sameach, a happy, quote-unquote, Passover. Shalom, shalom.
Quando el rey Nimrod al cabo salía, vino en el cielo y en la estrellería, viendo lo santa en la judería, que había de nacer Abraham había. Abraham había, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham había, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel.
La mujer de Tera no nada, día ella preguntaba, ¿qué tiene la cara tan demonada? Ella ya sabía el bien que tenía.
Abraham amigo, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham amigo, Padre en niñez y a su marido no le descubría, topó una mara libarería. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. Abraham vino, Padre querido, Padre bendito, luz de Israel. הטוב והרע.